Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment telling me the last time life completely confused you, and let's embrace the chaos together. Because if you understand everything I'm about to say, you might actually be the problem. It began with fear, not the cinematic kind that comes with monsters or shadows, but the ancient kind, the one that crawls into the stomach when the fire starts to fade and the wind howls through the cave. Fear of not waking up the next morning? Fear of hunger. Fear of being erased from the earth without leaving a trace. The first wars didn't start because someone wanted more. They started because someone was terrified of having less. Imagine the first man who realized another tribe had fire. Fire meant warmth, safety, cooked meat, the difference between living and dying. He didn't see neighbors. He saw thieves of survival. And when his hand wrapped around a rock, it wasn't hatred yet. It was fear pretending to be courage. That was humanity's first weapon, a trembling decision dressed up as bravery. And so, survival became performance. When one man attacked to defend his food, another learned to strike first. Fear evolved into strategy. What began as an accident became an art. The stronger ones began to realize something intoxicating, that control felt better than safety. They didn't just want to survive anymore. They wanted to be remembered. After all, what's the point of living if no one fears you when you're gone? The absurd part is that this was probably the moment humanity invented ambition. One spark of terror turned into a burning hunger for control. And once we tasted that feeling, the rush of deciding who gets to eat, who gets to speak, who gets to live, we couldn't stop. Maybe that's why even today people argue online like cavemen around a fire. The setting changed, but the brain didn't. We're still trying to win something, even if it's just a comment section. Somewhere in those early years, blood became language. Killing wasn't just an act, it was a message. This is mine. I am stronger. You will remember me. Tribes painted walls with red symbols, not because they loved violence, but because silence was worse. To be unseen was death, and the human ego, even then, couldn't stand being invisible. We discovered that fear of extinction hurts more than blood on the hands. The irony? The ones who feared death the most became the ones who caused it for others. Somewhere between defending the cave and burning the village across the river, the human heart decided it was better to rule than to disappear. That's when fear stopped being protection. It became identity. To kill meant you existed. To win meant you mattered. We laugh at the absurdity of kings sending armies to die for land they'd never walk on. But are we really different? People today still wage quieter wars. For validation, for dominance, for being right. History just swapped the spear for the smartphone. Maybe civilization didn't end the war instinct. It just gave it Wi-Fi. There's a grim kind of comedy in how our greatest achievements began with panic. Cities were built from fear of exposure, religion from fear of meaninglessness, governments from fear of chaos. We wrapped our anxiety in marble, armor, and scripture. But under all the grandeur, it's the same trembling heartbeat from that first night in the dark. Sometimes I wonder if the first soldier ever cried after his first kill. Maybe he expected triumph and found only silence. Maybe he realized too late that power doesn't erase fear. It multiplies it. The more you control, the more you dread losing it. And that is the cruel trick of war. It promises security while breeding the very terror it claims to cure. It's easy to imagine those first humans sitting by the dying embers of a stolen fire, staring into the smoke and wondering if it was worth it. They probably didn't have the words for guilt, but they felt something heavy, something hollow. That was the birth of another human invention. Justification. Because once you've spilled blood, you must believe it was for a reason. And from that illusion, entire civilizations were born. The first war ended, not when one side won, but when both sides forgot why they started. That's the part no one ever writes on stone walls. The fires died out, but the lesson didn't. Fear, once awakened, never goes back to sleep. It just waits, quiet, patient, for the next reason to feel alive again. Fear alone was never enough to sustain a civilization. At some point, survival needed a costume, something to make it look noble, divine, or at least worth dying for. That's how the first leaders appeared, those who realized that if you spoke with enough conviction, people would mistake your hunger for destiny. The hunter became the king simply because he told the story better, and stories, as it turns out, are deadlier than weapons. The moment humans learned to organize their fear, the first kingdom was born. Someone had to guard the food, someone had to decide when to fight, and someone, conveniently, had to sit on the biggest rock and call it a throne. Power disguised itself as protection. But let's be honest, protection is just domination with a friendly face. From then on, every wall built to defend also kept others out, and every soldier sworn to protect was one battle away from invading. It's funny how quickly fear became paperwork. There were meetings, rituals, and speeches before killing anyone. Priests blessed wars, councils debated moral reasons to slaughter neighbors. The bureaucracy of blood began early. Humans were no longer just reacting to fear. They were managing it, budgeting it, justifying it like accountants of chaos. And as civilizations grew, fear got smarter. It learned to wear crowns and write poetry. That's how love entered the battlefield. Strange, isn't it? Love, that thing meant to unite, became a weapon. Families were merged through marriage to end wars, but those unions were usually signed with ink mixed with resentment. The Romans married daughters to rivals. The French sealed treaties with kisses that tasted like strategy. It wasn't romance, it was risk management. Love became the polite version of conquest, a way to hold power without drawing a sword. Though, let's be fair, it didn't always work. Half the time, the couple ended up hating each other and started new wars out of sheer spite. Humanity, forever consistent in its inconsistency. And then came the banners, the songs, the flags, the great theater of belonging. Soldiers marched, poets wrote, and entire nations convinced themselves that killing in unison was somehow sacred. There's something almost comic about how we turned slaughter into ceremony. We invented uniforms, so everyone could die matching, like it was a wedding. Maybe that's the secret of human endurance. If you make the horror look organized, it becomes bearable. But beneath the music and speeches, the truth remained simple. People fought because they were afraid of losing what they thought was theirs. Territory, pride, faith, identity, all of it built on the fragile illusion of ownership. And once someone believes something is mine, they'll burn the world to defend it. Curiously, if you ask historians what the oldest word for war means, many will tell you it's rooted in words like confusion, chaos, or desire. It's almost poetic. We started wars because we didn't know who we were. That confusion still echoes. You see it every time someone argues about politics at dinner or online. The same tribal instinct, just in better lighting. We no longer paint our faces with clay. We paint our opinions with hashtags. We don't throw spears. We throw sarcasm. The tools changed, but the impulse, the deep, quivering need to dominate, stayed untouched. And yet, even in the darkest times, humans had this absurd talent for beauty. They painted battles on cave walls not just to record death, but to make sense of it. Every spear frozen in pigment was an attempt to prove that chaos could be understood. We created art to humanize what fear had deformed. There's a strange tenderness in that, a tragic desire to find meaning inside madness. Still, the smarter we became, the better we got at dressing up violence. Empires wrote laws to justify it. Philosophers called it natural. Kings called it glory. And the people, desperate to belong to something greater, believed them. It's easy to follow someone who promises safety, even if the cost is your humanity. Maybe that's why people still fall for leaders who promise to restore order. It's never about peace. It's about control and wearing a comforting tone of voice. At some point, humanity confused fear with purpose. We started believing that the ability to destroy meant we were in charge of destiny. And when enough people believe that, they stop asking why they're fighting and start asking how to win. The battlefield became a mirror, reflecting everything we didn't want to see about ourselves: greed, insecurity, pride. The tragic comedy is that we've spent thousands of years trying to defeat our own reflection. It's unsettling to think that every war, from the caves to the cities, began with someone trying to feel safe. That's the cruel joke of history. Our deepest wars are never with others, but with the parts of ourselves we can't control. We conquer land because we can't conquer our minds. We spill blood because it's easier than spilling truth. And still, after all the centuries of killing and rebuilding, humans wake up each morning pretending they've learned something. Maybe that's the most beautiful delusion of all, that progress exists, that someday we'll outgrow the instinct to destroy. But deep down, we know it's just another performance. Civilization isn't the opposite of war. It's the intermission. And as history waits for its next act, the audience, all of us, keeps pretending not to notice the smoke rising again behind the curtain. There was a moment in history when the line between defending and dominating quietly disappeared. It happened so slowly that no one noticed. What began as a group of frightened people guarding their crops turned into armies marching beneath banners, shouting about destiny and honor. Humans learned to fight not only out of fear, but out of habit. And once something becomes habit, it stops feeling wrong. The first soldiers probably believed they were protecting their homes. Their grandchildren believed they were chosen by the gods. By the time their descendants arrived, they just wanted to be on the winning side, because being right mattered less than being alive. It's funny, in a dark kind of way, how easily morality bends when someone starts playing drums and handing out uniforms. War gave structure to chaos. It gave men a schedule. Wake up, march, kill, eat, sleep, repeat. There's comfort in predictability, even if it comes with the occasional sword through the ribs. Humans crave purpose so badly that they'll accept any version of it, even if it's soaked in blood. Maybe that's why modern people still love corporate hierarchies, just cleaner uniforms and better dental plans. The strange thing is how quickly the idea of the enemy became addictive. Once a tribe realized it could define itself by who it opposed, identity was born. Without an enemy, people felt lost. Peace, though desirable in theory, became awkward in practice. What do you do when you no longer have someone to hate? History shows us the answer. You invent a new one. That's how borders multiplied, how flags sprouted like weeds, and how the map of the world became a patchwork of ancient grudges wearing new names. And through all of it, fear never left. It just put on a crown. The king's paranoia became law, his insecurities written into commandments. The people didn't mind. Fear made sense when it had an address. Better to tremble before a ruler than to tremble before the unknown. It's hard not to laugh at that, though. We traded existential terror for scheduled oppression, like swapping nightmares for bills. Progress, right? But something else happened beneath all that blood and ceremony. Humans discovered they could unite through violence. It was the most ironic invention of all time. Killing each other made people feel less alone. Armies became families. Soldiers fought side by side, cried over fallen friends, and discovered that the bond of shared trauma could outlast peace itself. The battlefield wasn't just a place of death, it was a place of belonging. And when you think about it, that's tragic comedy at its finest. We spend our entire existence looking for connection, and we found it in the middle of carnage. Stories from those times are filled with contradictions that only humans could invent. A soldier would kill a stranger in the morning, then spend the night writing a poem about the stars. A general would burn a village and later cry at the sound of a child's song. It's almost as if humans wanted to prove they could be monsters and poets in the same breath. Maybe that's why ancient myths were filled with heroes. We needed to believe that all the horror had purpose, that suffering was somehow noble. Without that illusion, the whole structure collapses. And it did collapse repeatedly. Every empire that rose out of fear eventually fell into the same trap, mistaking control for safety. The Romans built roads, aqueducts, laws. They believed they had mastered the world. And then came the barbarians, or as the barbarians probably called themselves, the neighbors you didn't invite to dinner. Empires always forget that fear doesn't disappear, it migrates. It waits outside the gates, gathering strength, learning from your mistakes. When the walls fall, it comes back wearing your old armor. Still, even as civilizations turn to dust, something stubborn in the human spirit refused to learn the lesson. People continued to believe that if they could just conquer enough, control enough, or build walls high enough, they could finally rest. It never worked. The more we gained, the less we trusted. The kings feared their heirs, the generals feared their soldiers, and the people feared everyone else. History became a long comedy of paranoia with very bad endings. And yet, every once in a while, a voice would rise against it. A philosopher, a prophet, a poet, reminding everyone that power and peace were not the same thing. But their words were usually written in ink, while the rulers wrote theirs in blood. Guess which one dried faster? Even now, we build monuments to the warriors, not the thinkers. Because, let's face it, Guy who prevented war doesn't sound nearly as exciting on a statue. Still, the human instinct for meaning is relentless. That's what makes our species both beautiful and exhausting. Every act of cruelty eventually inspires a song, a painting, a philosophy. The same hands that hold weapons also carve marble into angels. It's as if humanity is constantly trying to apologize to itself, building cathedrals over graves, writing prayers over broken bones. We destroy, then decorate the ruins. It's our most consistent art form. And somewhere in that mess, the concept of heroism took shape. The idea that suffering could be redeemed if it looked brave enough. Soldiers began to see themselves not as victims of fear, but as architects of fate. Glory became the perfume that masked the stench of death, and the more we glorified sacrifice, the easier it became to repeat it. That's how entire generations were raised, to believe that dying for a flag was living for a purpose. There's something deeply human, and darkly funny, about that. We built civilizations on the promise of peace, then designed them to depend on conflict. Our economies thrived on rebuilding what we destroyed. Our pride fed on the memory of battles we swore we'd never repeat. And through it all, we kept telling ourselves that next time would be different. It never was. Maybe that's why the concept of home became so important. People needed a reason to believe that somewhere beyond the smoke, there was something worth protecting. A face, a voice, a memory, something that justified the madness. But even that got corrupted. Home turned into property, property into power, and power into another excuse to draw lines on the earth. And so, the circle continued. If you look closely, the whole story of humanity could be summarized in one simple pattern. We fear, we fight, we forget. And then we fear again. But maybe the most revealing part isn't that we repeat our mistakes. It's that we romanticize them. We call them history. We teach them as lessons. We frame them in museums as if they were achievements. Perhaps that's the only way we can live with ourselves, by pretending that destruction was just another form of creation. And maybe, in a twisted way, it is. Somewhere along the way, fear became performance art. People no longer fought just to survive. They fought to prove something, to the gods, to their rulers, to themselves. And when proving wasn't enough, they began competing for who could suffer the most beautifully. Martyrdom became fashion. Dying with conviction was more glamorous than living with doubt. The ancient world loved a good tragedy. The Greeks turned pain into theater, the Romans turned it into sport, and humanity turned it into habit. We invented heroism as a prettier name for self-destruction. What's remarkable is how universal the performance became. Every culture, no matter how distant, discovered the same equation. Blood equals meaning. The Aztecs offered hearts to the sun so it would rise again. Vikings believed dying in battle guaranteed a seat in Valhalla, where apparently there was no shortage of ale or bad decisions. Even the Crusaders, draped in holiness, were just reenacting the same primal fear, that the gods would forget them if they didn't make enough noise. It seems heaven has always been impressed by volume, and underneath that divine theater was something disturbingly human, the desperate need to feel in control. Killing gave that illusion. When life felt fragile and unpredictable, the act of taking another life became proof that you still had agency. The irony, of course, is that it only deepened the dependence on violence. Every victory needed another, every conquest another justification. Humanity got hooked on its own adrenaline. We didn't build civilizations, we built withdrawal symptoms. The funny thing about control is that it's never satisfied. The first king who built a wall to feel safe ended up building an army to protect the wall, a spy network to protect the army, and a palace guard to protect himself from the spies. Power creates paranoia, like fire creates smoke. The higher you climb, the smaller your sleep gets. And yet, rulers throughout history kept chasing that same illusion. The idea that if you control enough people, maybe you can finally control the chaos inside your own mind. Spoiler, it never worked. Even religion, the supposed cure for fear, became its greatest amplifier. Priests promised eternal peace, but only after an acceptable amount of earthly suffering. God became the ultimate accountant, tracking who deserved bliss and who deserved pain. And humanity, bless its irony, accepted the deal. People would rather suffer with certainty than live with ambiguity. At least damnation had rules. It's almost poetic. The same mind that invented war also invented confession. First we commit the sin, then we pay someone to forgive us for it. Somewhere in all that sacred chaos, love tried to sneak back in, but even that got corrupted. Lovers turned into possessions, and jealousy became a miniature war fought between two people instead of nations. The same pattern repeated itself, only smaller. Every household became a tiny empire, complete with diplomacy, espionage, and emotional sanctions. Sometimes I think couples should have peace treaties drafted by the UN. It would save time and maybe a few plates. But while humans were busy burning each other for righteousness or romance, something deeper was happening, the slow birth of guilt. When the smoke cleared and the bodies cooled, someone had to bury them. And the people who buried the dead started asking questions that frightened kings and gods alike. Was it worth it? Did we win or just survive? Those were dangerous thoughts. That's when the poets started whispering about the cost of glory, and philosophers began to doubt the meaning of victory. It was the first crack in the armor of certainty, and once it appeared, it never truly closed. Still, most people didn't want introspection. They wanted stories. Myths grew taller than mountains. Heroes became demigods, and failure was erased from the record. If history couldn't inspire, it would at least entertain. Every empire wrote its own bedtime story, usually ending with, "And we will reign forever." The irony is that the ink hadn't dried before the next invader arrived. Empires have the same lifespan as lies, long enough to believe, short enough to regret. And yet, through all that delusion, something extraordinary persisted. The belief that humanity could evolve beyond its instincts. Philosophers in Greece, monks in Asia, scholars in the Islamic Golden Age, they all tried to outthink fear. They studied stars, built libraries, mapped the human body. Knowledge became the new battlefield. The sword turned into the pen, and the war moved into the mind. But even there, we couldn't resist the old habits. Ideas became weapons. Arguments became crusades. Universities were built like fortresses. Apparently, intellectual enlightenment still required a good amount of shouting. Maybe that's why, no matter how much progress we claim, history feels like déjà vu. We build temples, then turn them into armories. We invent democracy, then turn it into theater. We create technology to connect, then use it to divide. The costumes change, the script doesn't. Humanity keeps reenacting the same ancient play, just with better lighting. It's both hilarious and tragic. We spend millennia trying to prove we're civilized while still measuring our worth by who we can defeat. Sometimes I imagine the first human to realize this. Someone standing on a battlefield surrounded by smoke and corpses, suddenly understanding that none of it mattered. Maybe they laughed, maybe they cried. Maybe they went home and told their children not to repeat the same mistakes. And maybe those children grew up and did it anyway, because forgetting is humanity's favorite survival tactic. If we remembered everything, we'd never get out of bed. And that's the quiet genius of fear. It erases the past just enough to make the next mistake feel new. Every generation believes it's smarter, kinder, more enlightened, right until the moment the drums start again. Then, like clockwork, the same fire that once kept us warm reminds us it can still burn. At some point, humanity started mistaking exhaustion for wisdom. After centuries of war, conquest, and divine justification, people didn't necessarily become better. They just got tired. Tired of burying sons, tired of rebuilding cities, tired of pretending that glory could fill the silence left by the dead. Peace didn't come as enlightenment. It came as fatigue. The battlefield grew quiet, not because we evolved, but because we ran out of breath. There's something darkly funny about that. We didn't outgrow violence, we just needed a nap. When the swords finally cooled, the survivors tried to invent new ways to make sense of what they'd done. They wrote scriptures, philosophies, constitutions. They painted angels over ashes, as if beauty could overwrite blood. Humanity has always been good at that, redecorating tragedy. Every cathedral is a confession built in stone, every monument a denial disguised as pride. We love to commemorate what we swore we'd never repeat, which is probably why history books weigh so much. They're full of promises no one kept. But peace, as we learned, has a short attention span. It starts as gratitude and ends as boredom. The same hands that once dug graves now start itching for meaning again. That's when people rediscover ambition. The soldiers become merchants, the generals become bankers, and suddenly the game changes, but the rules don't. Instead of conquering lands, we conquer markets. Instead of armies, we send advertisements. And somehow the casualties still pile up. Quieter this time, but just as real. You can almost picture it. A medieval knight reborn as a CEO giving a PowerPoint presentation about quarterly conquests. The armor's lighter, the battles are digital, but the hunger's the same. Humans never stopped wanting to feel superior. We just found socially acceptable ways to do it. Now, instead of burning villages, we just burn out. It's poetic in a way. The modern war is fought with stress, status, and Wi-Fi. The casualties look well-dressed but hollow. And beneath that modern polish, the old instincts still hum like static. We talk about progress as if evolution replaced emotion, but it didn't. The brain that once hunted mammoths still panics at rejection emails. The adrenaline that once surged at the sight of an enemy now triggers during traffic jams. We call it anxiety, but really, it's the same prehistoric alarm system, just confused by the lighting. Fear never left, it just got a desk job. What's strange is how deeply we romanticize control, even when it ruins us. We obsess over routines, numbers, achievements, as if mastering life's schedule can protect us from its chaos. It's the same impulse that once built empires, only now it builds self-help books. The irony is that control never makes people calmer. It just sharpens their panic. Maybe that's why some of the most powerful rulers in history were also the most paranoid. Absolute power doesn't corrupt absolutely. It just makes your anxiety punctual. Still, every generation convinces itself that it's the one that will finally break the cycle. We build machines to end labor, then create new kinds of labor to justify the machines. We invent diplomacy to prevent war, then sell weapons to keep diplomacy relevant. Humanity is a master of contradiction. We can pray for peace while funding conflict, love nature while paving it, value life while scrolling past suffering, and somehow we still manage to believe we're improving. Maybe hope is our most dangerous addiction, yet there's something beautifully absurd about how stubbornly we keep trying. For all our cruelty and confusion, humanity has a strange talent for redemption. We destroy cities, then compose symphonies about their ruins. We betray each other, then write novels about forgiveness. We've turned every scar into a story and every failure into philosophy. It's as if, deep down, we know we'll never stop falling, so we make art about the view on the way down. Even nature seems to play along with our delusions. Every spring, the earth resurrects itself as if to prove that renewal is still possible. Flowers bloom over battlefields. Birds nest in bullet holes. Time doesn't forgive, but it does forget. And maybe that's mercy enough. The ground doesn't hold grudges. Only humans do. And still we walk across it as if we own it, as if the soil beneath our feet isn't made from the dust of everyone who thought the same. Sometimes I wonder if the end of war will come not through peace, but through understanding. Not treaties, not leaders, but a collective exhaustion with fear itself. Maybe one day we'll realize that control was never the goal, that we were never meant to rule the world, only to live in it. But that's a dangerous kind of wisdom, the kind that doesn't fit neatly into slogans or speeches. It requires admitting that everything we've built might have been just a beautifully organized panic. And perhaps that's where it all circles back, to the same trembling hands that once picked up the first stone. The story of war is the story of the human heart refusing to sit still. We fight because we're afraid, and we're afraid because we think we're separate. But maybe the real conquest was never over land or power. Maybe it's over the illusion that we were ever alone in the first place. And if that's true, then the greatest victory won't come with flags or parades. It'll come in silence when we finally stop mistaking fear for purpose, and remember that the only thing we ever needed to conquer was ourselves. The strangest part about humanity's story isn't how much we've destroyed, it's how much we've survived. Somehow, after centuries of slaughter, famine, betrayal, and broken promises, we keep waking up. We keep pretending that tomorrow will be different. Maybe that's not delusion, maybe that's our greatest strength. The same instinct that once made us swing clubs at shadows now pushes us to build hospitals, write poetry, and plant trees in the ruins of old battlefields. It's like we can't help but rebuild, even when we don't know what we're rebuilding for. Perhaps hope isn't the opposite of fear. It's just fear wearing a prettier outfit. The world we live in now feels cleaner, more civilized, but it's really just war with better lighting. Countries fight with algorithms, corporations fight with patents, individuals fight with opinions. Our weapons got quieter, our armor more psychological. Even our smiles are tactical now. Humanity didn't evolve past conflict, we just outsourced it to technology and diplomacy. There's something both comforting and terrifying in realizing that the same brain that invented firewalls once invented fire. We're still trying to control the burn. And yet, in small ways, we've started to understand ourselves better. Psychology replaced witchcraft, therapy replaced confession, and self-awareness became the new religion. We talk about trauma now, about patterns and healing, as if we finally found the language to describe the invisible wars inside us. The irony, of course, is that the more we understand our minds, the more we realize they're just scaled-down versions of our civilizations, filled with negotiations, rebellions, peace treaties, and the occasional coup. Every human being is basically a small, unstable country trying to avoid civil war before breakfast. Still, there's progress hidden in the mess. We no longer worship conquerors quite as easily as we used to. The old statues are cracking, both literally and metaphorically. History's heroes are being re-examined, and it turns out most of them were just well-dressed egomaniacs with better PR. For once, people are asking not who won, but who paid the price for that victory. It's uncomfortable, but necessary. Because the truth is, every civilization we celebrate was built on someone else's silence. Maybe redemption begins the moment we start listening to those voices again. Even the concept of love, that fragile, overused word, has started to evolve. It's no longer just about possession or protection. It's about understanding, about learning how to exist without conquest. In a world that once believed dominance was proof of strength, choosing empathy feels almost rebellious. And maybe that's why love still terrifies people. It requires surrender, not victory. It's the one war where both sides can win only by laying down their arms. But we're slow learners. We'd rather buy flowers than change habits. Sometimes I imagine what future archaeologists will think when they dig up the ruins of our digital world. They'll find billions of photos of people smiling, billions of messages sent across invisible networks, and they'll probably wonder if we ever truly saw each other. For all our communication, we might be the loneliest generation in history. We built tools to connect, but ended up building mirrors. Maybe that's humanity's new battlefield, the space between who we pretend to be and who we actually are. But it's not all despair. The fact that we can even ask these questions means something. Our ancestors didn't have that luxury. They were too busy staying alive. We, for all our chaos, have the privilege of reflection. And while it might seem like navel-gazing at times, maybe that's how progress really begins. Not with revolutions or declarations, but with the quiet admission that we've been wrong before. Every insight is a tiny act of rebellion against our own history. The planet itself, though, might not share our patience. Nature, silent and patient, has been watching this human experiment unfold with the calm of an old teacher. And lately, she's started grading our work. Floods, droughts, melting ice, all reminders that for every war we wage against ourselves, there's another we've been quietly losing against the Earth. The irony is brutal. We spent millennia fighting to control the world, only to realize we were never in charge. Maybe the ultimate lesson isn't domination or diplomacy, it's humility, the kind that comes when you finally understand you were never the protagonist, just a guest overstaying your welcome. Yet even that thought carries hope. Because every time humanity reaches a breaking point, we invent something astonishing. Art, technology, compassion, each born from disaster. We seem to need destruction to remember creation. Maybe that's the rhythm of our species. Inhale chaos, exhale beauty. It's not a healthy cycle, but it's ours. The same species that invented nuclear weapons also sent poems into space. The contradiction is maddening and magnificent, and maybe, in the end, that's the secret. We keep searching for peace as if it's a destination, when it's really just a moment, fleeting, fragile, easily missed. Maybe it's the laughter between disasters, the kindness shared between strangers, the split second when someone chooses to understand instead of attack. That's peace, not eternal, not perfect, but human. And perhaps that's enough, because even after everything we've done, everything we've broken, the world still spins and we still wake up trying again. Maybe the miracle was never that we learned to fight, it's that we never stopped trying to forgive. History has a strange sense of humor. It repeats itself so often you'd think we'd start charging admission. Every era, no matter how advanced or enlightened, finds a new way to rediscover the same old fears dressed in modern clothes. The weapons change, the language softens, the costumes improve, but the melody of control, ambition, and survival never stops playing. You can almost imagine the universe sitting somewhere, watching us evolve and muttering, "Really? Again?" Humanity loves to believe in its own progress. We build monuments to our intellect, send satellites into the void, and declare that we've finally outgrown the primitive instincts of our ancestors. Yet, every so often, something cracks: a financial collapse, a political scandal, a war that was supposed to be impossible. And there it is again, that old primal panic, the same trembling heartbeat from the caves. Civilization is just a polished nervous breakdown stretched across centuries. You see it in the smallest moments. The businessman checking his phone every 10 seconds for an email that never arrives. The politician rehearsing empathy in front of a mirror. The influencer staging happiness like a military operation. It's the same hunger for validation that once drove men to paint on cave walls, except now the walls are digital and the applause comes in numbers. We traded spears for smartphones, but the chase is identical. We're still hunting approval, terrified of invisibility. And maybe that's the punchline of evolution. We got smarter, not wiser. We discovered how to split atoms before learning how to share food. We can simulate consciousness, but still can't apologize properly. Every technological leap just gives us fancier ways to misunderstand each other. Sometimes, I think the real reason aliens haven't contacted us is because they're afraid we'd ask them to subscribe. But amid the irony, something genuinely beautiful persists. For all our absurdities, humans keep trying to create meaning. Even after centuries of repeating the same mistakes, we write, we paint, we sing about the possibility of being better. Every piece of art, every act of kindness, every quiet apology whispered into the dark is a small rebellion against the weight of history. Maybe that's what separates us from extinction. Not intelligence, not power, but the refusal to stop hoping. Still, the struggle never disappears. Fear evolves too. It learns to hide in subtler forms. Now it disguises itself as ambition, perfectionism, even love. People chase success not for joy, but to escape insignificance. Parents push children not out of cruelty, but out of inherited terror. Nations compete for dominance because the idea of equality feels too fragile. It's the same old war, fear against fear, fought with new uniforms and better slogans. And yet, every once in a while, something unexpected happens. Someone chooses empathy over ego. A leader steps down instead of clinging to power. A person forgives when vengeance would have been easier. These moments don't make headlines, but they're the quiet revolutions that actually move humanity forward. Maybe peace was never meant to come from treaties or speeches. It was always meant to come from individuals choosing not to repeat the same madness. If you look closely, you can see that choice echoing through time. A Roman soldier sparing a child in a burning village. A scientist refusing to weaponize his invention. A stranger offering food to an enemy. These acts, small and almost invisible, are the real victories history never records. Because while fear builds empires, compassion builds endurance. Empires fall, empathy lingers. Of course, it's easier said than done. The modern world doesn't reward stillness, it monetizes panic. Everything moves faster than reflection, louder than reason. Silence feels dangerous now, as if stopping to think might expose us. Maybe that's why true wisdom always sounds like a whisper. It's the only voice quiet enough to survive the noise. And so we circle back to the beginning: fear, control, and the fragile miracle of awareness. The same story retold in infinite variations. But maybe that's the point. Maybe humanity isn't meant to finish evolving. Maybe we're meant to keep struggling, to keep learning, to keep building meaning out of mistakes. It's an exhausting destiny, sure, but also a strangely poetic one. Because in the end, the fact that we're even aware of our own chaos, that we can laugh at it, question it, and still choose to keep going, might be the closest thing to redemption we'll ever get. Somewhere out there, the next chapter of our story is already beginning, quietly, invisibly, in the mind of someone who's just now realizing that control was never the goal. That the wars we've fought, the empires we've built, the gods we've invented were all mirrors reflecting the same question back at us. Can we live without fear? And maybe, just maybe, the answer isn't found in victory or surrender, but in the small, trembling courage of simply trying again tomorrow. Somewhere deep inside the human story, between the ashes of what we've burned and the dreams of what we still want to become, there's a quiet truth that refuses to die. It whispers through centuries of noise, reminding us that maybe the whole point of being human isn't to win, but to understand. The irony, of course, is that we've spent most of history trying to prove the opposite. We built kingdoms just to collapse under their weight, invented gods that looked suspiciously like ourselves, and called every failure progress. Turns out, if evolution had a sense of humor, it would probably look like us. Fragile, anxious, convinced we're in control while barely managing breakfast. We've learned to fly through the sky, but we still can't figure out how to talk to each other on the ground. We've mapped the entire planet and still get lost in our own living rooms. We send robots to Mars while ghosting people who love us. Civilization feels like an elaborate magic trick. We distract ourselves with inventions so we don't have to face what hasn't changed. The oldest war, the one between fear and meaning, never ended. It just moved inside us. You can see it in the way we chase things we don't need. We work ourselves sick to buy peace of mind, then spend our vacations trying to remember what peace feels like. We call it productivity, but maybe it's just another form of survival. The new camouflage of the civilized world. Our ancestors painted their faces for battle. We paint our schedules. The ritual is the same. Appear strong, stay busy, and hope no one notices how terrified you are of standing still. But the stillness, when it finally comes, is where truth lives. There's a reason silence scares us. It's the only place we can hear the echo of everything we've been running from. The mind, left unattended, starts asking uncomfortable questions. What if I'm not supposed to conquer anything? What if the meaning of life isn't hidden in power, but in how we carry weakness? What if all of human history has been one long detour from acceptance? Those are dangerous questions, because they strip away the illusions that keep us moving. Without the promise of control, what's left to chase? Yet that's exactly where transformation begins. Every great shift in human consciousness started not with certainty, but with surrender. When the first philosophers questioned the gods, when Galileo looked through a telescope, when a nurse decided that caring for the wounded mattered more than flags, each was an act of rebellion against the comfort of ignorance. Progress was never born from strength. It came from the cracks where people dared to doubt the story they were told. Maybe that's the real battlefield now, not land or ideology, but imagination. And that battle is fought in the smallest of ways. In the moment, someone apologizes instead of defending themselves. In a stranger holding a door without expecting a thank you. In the rare silence between insults online, when someone decides to stop typing and actually think. These gestures might look trivial, but they're revolutions in miniature. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that the hardest wars to win are the ones fought quietly without banners or blood. The tragedy and comedy of being human is that we know all this and still keep forgetting. We build entire religions around compassion, then use them to justify cruelty. We preach love and still find ways to measure who deserves it. We talk about peace like it's a product you can order with express shipping. The pattern is so obvious it's almost funny, if it weren't so sad. Maybe the universe repeats itself because it's waiting for us to finally laugh at the right part of the joke. And yet, maybe forgetting is part of the design. Maybe we need to keep falling just to rediscover how to stand. A species that never forgets, never forgives. And forgiveness, real forgiveness, is the only proof we've ever evolved at all. Every apology is a small act of defiance against history, a refusal to let the past dictate the shape of the future. Perhaps that's why children, who haven't yet learned to armor their hearts, seem wiser than adults who've built fortresses around theirs. Innocence isn't ignorance, it's the courage to try again. If you think about it, the greatest inventions of humanity aren't weapons or machines, they're moments. The handshake after generations of conflict. The melody that survives a war. The smile between people who shouldn't have anything left to share. These are the things that outlive empires. No algorithm can measure them, no history book can fully capture them, but they are the threads that hold everything together. They're what remind us that the point of survival was never domination, it was connection. And maybe that's the quiet revelation at the end of all this noise, that the universe doesn't reward control, it rewards understanding. The people who shaped history weren't the ones who conquered it, but the ones who listened, to stars, to nature, to pain, to each other. Every great leap forward began with someone who stopped long enough to pay attention. That's the kind of power we've been too afraid to trust, the power that doesn't need to destroy anything to prove it's real. Perhaps one day, when the last borders are forgotten and the last weapons rust into soil, someone will look back and realize that the whole story of humanity was never about war at all. It was about learning to live after it, to sit in the ruins, laugh at our arrogance, and finally understand that survival was never the victory, awakening was. Because in the end, no matter how many times we destroy, rebuild, or forget, the miracle is that we're still here, still searching, still reaching out through the smoke for something softer than control, something that feels at last like peace. There's something almost comical about how the world keeps pretending it's figured itself out. Every generation swears it's the one that finally cracked the code, that humanity has matured, that this time we've learned from our mistakes. Then a few years go by, a crisis hits, and we watch the same old story replay in high definition. It's as if history is a stubborn teacher giving us the same test until we finally stop cheating off each other. You can change the stage, the costumes, the soundtrack, but the plot never really changes. Fear enters, pride takes the lead, and love, poor love, gets rewritten out of the script halfway through. Modern life, in many ways, is just war with better manners. The battlefield has gone digital, but the instincts haven't aged a day. People still crave victory, only now it's measured in followers, salaries, and square footage. We don't swing swords anymore. We refresh our notifications. The empire is personal now. Everyone's a one-person kingdom defending their image, their beliefs, their precious sense of being right. The irony is that even in this quiet war, no one actually wins. The more you fight for validation, the emptier it feels when you get it. It's like drinking seawater. The thirst only grows. You can see it in how we've rebranded competition as ambition. We celebrate overwork, idolize exhaustion, and call burnout a badge of honor. The ancient warrior fought for glory. The modern one fights their inbox. Same stress, fewer horses. We fill our calendars until we can't hear ourselves think, and when the silence finally comes, it feels so foreign we turn the TV back on just to drown it out. We've become terrified of stillness, as if peace were something unnatural. Maybe that's the greatest irony of all. We dream of serenity, but panic when it finally arrives. And then there's the illusion of control, the oldest addiction on Earth. Humanity will try to dominate anything that moves: land, animals, time, emotions, even each other's opinions. We invented clocks to control time, diets to control the body, and social contracts to control behavior. Yet for all our systems, the universe continues to do whatever it pleases. We schedule our lives down to the minute, and then one phone call can turn it all upside down. Maybe that's why laughter exists. Not as entertainment, but as survival. Comedy is how humans make peace with the fact that the world never checks our agenda. Even nature seems to find us ridiculous. We build cities to defy her, only to have them crumble at the first flood. We write laws for her to obey, and she answers with earthquakes. Every empire that thought it could conquer the natural order ended up buried under it. Literally. It's humbling to realize that the same soil that grows our food is also waiting patiently to reclaim us. We call it death, but maybe it's just nature's way of recycling arrogance. And still, amid the absurdity, there's beauty, the kind that slips through the cracks of chaos, unnoticed but persistent. It shows up in the way people help each other during disasters, or how strangers laugh together in traffic after realizing they're all equally late. It's the gentle rebellion of kindness against the machinery of fear. Empires rise and fall, but a shared smile outlasts them all. Maybe that's what redemption really is, not grand gestures, but quiet resistance to cynicism. We often talk about humanity as a species of intelligence, but maybe what truly defines us is our capacity for contradiction. We destroy what we love, then write songs about the loss. We hurt each other and then build entire religions around forgiveness. We fear the unknown and then pay money to see horror movies. It's tragic and hilarious at the same time, like watching someone trip over their own brilliance. Maybe the universe finds us entertaining. Maybe that's why it hasn't turned us off yet. Some people believe technology will save us, that artificial intelligence or interstellar travel will mark our next great leap. But history suggests otherwise. We always find ways to bring our chaos with us. We could colonize Mars and still start arguments about whose crater is bigger. Progress doesn't erase human nature. It just gives it shinier tools. We'll automate everything except wisdom, because that one can't be downloaded. Wisdom requires discomfort, reflection, failure. 3 things we spend most of our energy avoiding. And yet, despite our mess, there's something deeply endearing about humanity's persistence. We fall, we rebuild, we fall again, but never in exactly the same way. Each time, there's a subtle improvement, a faint glimmer of learning. Maybe that's how evolution really works. Not in leaps, but in laughter. Small, self-aware moments when we realize how ridiculous we've been and decide to do slightly better. History may repeat, but the echo softens. Perhaps that's the quiet miracle of existence. That we keep trying, that in spite of everything, the wars, the greed, the endless noise, people still paint sunsets, write lullabies, plant trees whose shade they'll never sit under. We may never learn how to stop fighting, but we've learned how to make beauty in the middle of it. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the goal was never perfection, only participation, to witness the chaos, to feel it fully, and to leave behind something tender before the curtain falls. Because if the story of humanity has taught us anything, it's that even in our most absurd moments, we never stop reaching for light, even while standing knee-deep in our own shadow. Maybe the end was never meant to look like an ending. Maybe it's not an explosion or a flood or a divine trumpet, but something quieter. The slow realization that we've been living the same story under different names. Humanity loves its finales, but life rarely gives us one. The truth is that endings are just pauses before the next version of ourselves begins again, pretending it's the first time. The Earth has seen this movie before. New cast, same plot. And somehow, the audience keeps asking for a sequel. Every civilization that thought it was eternal eventually learned humility. The Romans had their marble, the Egyptians their pyramids, the British their empire, and we have Wi-Fi and emotional burnout. It's a different flavor of collapse, but the symptoms are familiar. Every age ends when its confidence outgrows its wisdom. We build monuments to our cleverness, while quietly ignoring the cracks beneath our feet. And when the whole thing finally falls, we call it tragedy, even though it's really just physics doing its job. What makes this cycle almost comical is how much effort we put into denying it. We tell ourselves the future will be different, that technology, enlightenment, or sheer optimism will finally break the pattern. We create apps to track our mindfulness and podcasts to teach empathy, as if self-awareness were a subscription service. But for all our sophistication, we still argue like cavemen, only now we do it through comment sections instead of clubs. Progress has made us more articulate about our insecurities, not less insecure. And yet, within that irony, there's something almost tender. Because even when we're failing, we fail beautifully. We turn disaster into art, despair into philosophy, collapse into comedy. Humans are the only creatures that can stand in the rubble of their own mistakes and say, that's kind of poetic. It's the absurd grace that keeps us going, the ability to find meaning even when meaning refuses to cooperate. Perhaps that's why we're obsessed with immortality. Not the kind promised by gods or science, but the emotional kind, being remembered. Every book written, every photo posted, every love confessed is a small rebellion against forgetting. Deep down, we know we'll vanish, so we spend our lives leaving little messages carved into time. I was here. I mattered. It's a sweet, tragic impulse, like writing your name in sand while the tide's already coming in. But the funny thing is, maybe that's enough. Maybe the purpose was never permanence. Maybe we were meant to create, not to keep. The stars we admire at night are already dead, and yet their light still reaches us. That's what humans are. Dying stars pretending to be eternal, still managing to shine long after they're gone. It's hard not to find that beautiful, even if it's heartbreaking. And through it all, fear remains. Quieter now, but still present. It's there in the pauses, in the things we don't say, in the long scroll through a phone at midnight when silence feels too loud. Fear never really left us. It just learned manners. It no longer roars. It whispers. But maybe that's progress too. Because when fear becomes quiet, we can finally hear something else beneath it. Curiosity, the desire to know, to understand, to connect. The same force that once made us pick up a weapon now makes us pick up a telescope. Maybe the instinct wasn't wrong, just misdirected. And sometimes I wonder what the world will look like when we finally stop mistaking progress for purpose, or when we stop racing to escape ourselves and start learning how to live with who we already are. Maybe the real revolution won't be technological or political, but emotional, when we collectively admit that the thing we've been trying to control was never the world, but our own fear of being small. And what a relief it would be to finally stop pretending to be gods and start being good instead. Because in the end, it all circles back to the simplest truths, the ones we keep forgetting because they sound too easy to be profound. Love matters more than power. Kindness lasts longer than anger. Laughter, no matter how inappropriate, will always be more healing than silence. These aren't revelations, they're reminders, the same ones whispered by grandparents, poets, and strangers in moments of unexpected clarity. Maybe wisdom isn't something we discover at the end, but something we've been carrying all along, buried under layers of pride and noise. And so, as the story continues, because it always does, maybe the greatest act of defiance left to us is gentleness. To wake up each morning knowing how fragile everything is and still choose to care. To look at the chaos, the repetition, the absurdity, and smile anyway. Because if the universe really is laughing at us, the least we can do is laugh back. After all, that's what we've been doing since the beginning, turning fear into firelight, mistakes into meaning, and survival into something that, against all odds, still looks a little bit like grace. It's strange how every civilization, at some point, begins to resemble the stories it once told about others. We start by believing we're different, wiser, kinder, more advanced. But give it a few generations and the same patterns quietly emerge, dressed in modern clothes. The temples turn into skyscrapers, the priests into influencers, the rituals into morning routines. Even our gods have social media accounts now, though we call them brands. Humanity didn't abandon worship, it just outsourced it to algorithms. The digital age promised to make us infinite. We can preserve our memories, replicate our faces, and store our voices forever in invisible clouds. It's poetic in a slightly terrifying way. Immortality by subscription. The ancient Egyptians built pyramids to defy death. We build data servers. The outcome is the same. Both start out as monuments and end up as ruins. There's a certain irony in the idea that we may be the first civilization to bury itself under its own Wi-Fi signal. But perhaps that's just another chapter in our ongoing attempt to make meaning out of chaos. Humans can't stand the idea of insignificance. We'll fight wars, invent religions, even start podcasts just to prove we matter. The universe, vast and indifferent, doesn't answer back. And so we fill the silence ourselves. That's what art is, really, an echo thrown into the void, hoping someone, somewhere, will recognize the sound. It's almost adorable if you think about it. We are cosmic toddlers demanding the universe to notice our drawings on the refrigerator door of existence, yet there's something undeniably powerful about that defiance. Every great creation, every poem, symphony, or protest is a refusal to vanish quietly. We know how small we are, but we shout anyway. Maybe that's why the human voice is so sacred. It's not just sound, it's survival disguised as beauty. When someone speaks their truth, sings their pain, or laughs in the face of despair, they're doing the same thing our ancestors did when they first lit fire in the dark. They're saying, I'm still here. And maybe that's what love has always been too, a kind of rebellion against entropy. The heart, in all its foolishness, doesn't care about logic or statistics. It just insists on connecting, even when everything else falls apart. It's easy to mock love for its irrationality, but it's the only reason we still build instead of burn. People fall in love knowing it might end in heartbreak, and still they do it again. That's not stupidity, that's courage on repeat. You can see this stubborn hope everywhere if you look closely. In an old man watering flowers no one will see, in a child building castles in the sand as the tide approaches, in the stranger who picks up trash from a street they don't own. These are the small, unrecorded acts that keep the world from collapsing entirely. They're not dramatic, but they're the threads that hold the whole thing together. We talk a lot about heroes, but maybe the real ones are the people who do good without needing applause. Still, for all our progress, the ancient fears never truly left. We still chase security, still crave control, still whisper prayers into the dark, only now we call them search queries. The rituals are the same, the tools just got fancier. We meditate with apps, confess to therapists, and sacrifice sleep to the glowing gods of productivity. The human mind is a temple with bad Wi-Fi, full of devotion, constantly buffering. Maybe that's why inner peace feels like a miracle. It's the one technology we can't mass produce. And somewhere inside this circus of ambition and anxiety, there's a quiet realization waiting to be heard. That maybe meaning was never supposed to be found in conquest or perfection, but in presence. The moment you stop running long enough to notice a breeze or a laugh, or the way sunlight lands on a stranger's face, that's it. That's the truth everyone's been trying to bottle, label, and sell for centuries. The problem is, you can't monetize awareness. The second you try, it slips through your fingers like air. What's fascinating, and a little funny, is how we always rediscover this truth after everything else fails. Every generation builds its Tower of Babel, of wealth, technology, ideology, and when it collapses, someone in the rubble starts painting again. That's our rhythm. Build, break, remember. The cycle itself might be the point. Maybe we need destruction to remind us of what actually matters. The universe keeps handing us the same lesson, wrapped in new disasters, and we keep unwrapping it like it's a surprise. But for all the chaos, for all the endless falling and rebuilding, there's still a strange elegance to it all. We are, in every sense, the comedy and tragedy of creation itself, beings aware enough to see our own flaws, but foolish enough to repeat them anyway. And maybe that's what makes us worth watching. Because even when everything is burning, someone will still find a way to laugh, to help, to write, to love. The apocalypse, if it ever comes, won't end with silence. It'll end with someone making a joke, someone holding a hand, someone looking at the stars and whispering, "Okay, maybe one more try." And perhaps that's the real secret of survival. Not strength, not power, not intelligence, but persistence laced with humor. The awareness that nothing lasts, yet everything matters anyway. We are the only creatures foolish enough to find beauty in our own impermanence. And as long as that foolishness endures, so will we. Stumbling, singing, building, breaking, laughing, crying, and always somehow beginning again. Maybe the most human thing we've ever done is believe that we can start over. No matter how many ruins we leave behind, no matter how many times we betray ourselves, there's always this stubborn voice that says, one more try. It's naive, it's irrational, and yet it's the only reason we're still here. Civilizations crumble, empires vanish, ideologies turn to dust, but hope refuses to retire. It just changes its outfit, learns a few new words, and walks right back into history as if nothing happened. You can see it everywhere once you start looking. The farmer planting seeds after a drought, the artist painting again after rejection, the scientist rebuilding after an experiment explodes, literally or metaphorically. It's the same defiance that's been with us since the first spark of fire, the refusal to let the darkness have the last word. Maybe hope isn't optimism at all. Maybe it's just the elegant madness of refusing to surrender to logic. Because logically, we should have given up by now. But logic has never been humanity's strong suit. We're emotional creatures, pretending to be rational, and that's half our charm. We invent entire systems to make sense of the universe, only to break them the moment they stop serving our egos. The Middle Ages had divine order. We have economic growth. Both promise salvation if you follow the rules, and both collapse the moment someone asks, but why? It's comforting, in a darkly funny way, to realize that our most advanced models of the universe are still built on the same fragile scaffolding of belief. We call it science now, but deep down it's still a story, and we're still the unreliable narrators. And yet, for all our delusions, we keep producing beauty, maybe because we know that beauty is the only honest thing left. It doesn't pretend to save you, it just reminds you you're alive. Think of music, an invisible force that organizes chaos for a few minutes and makes us feel like everything makes sense. Or a painting that captures light that no longer exists. It's almost mystical, the way humans create permanence out of things that shouldn't last. Even laughter is a kind of art, the body's way of saying, I survived this moment. That survival instinct runs deep, and not just in the physical sense. Spiritually, emotionally, we've turned resilience into ritual. Every religion, every philosophy, every self-help quote on the internet is just a remix of the same message. Endure, keep breathing, try again. We dress it up in different languages, different metaphors, but it's all the same heartbeat repeating through centuries. The Stoics called it acceptance. Buddhists call it awareness. Therapists call it processing. Personally, I think it's just humans trying to outsmart despair with vocabulary. But sometimes, endurance looks a lot like denial. We convince ourselves that progress means movement, that as long as we're doing something, we're evolving. Maybe that's why people obsess over goals, routines, 5-year plans. Standing still feels like failure, but maybe it's just the one thing we've never truly learned to do. Stillness terrifies us because it reveals what all the motion was hiding, that we have no idea where we're going. It's funny, really. We've mapped every corner of the planet, yet most people can't stand being alone with their own thoughts. Maybe the next great exploration won't be interplanetary, but internal. The future we're building seems obsessed with efficiency, faster connections, smarter machines, shorter attention spans. We've made convenience our new religion. But in our rush to automate discomfort, we've forgotten that discomfort is what makes us human. Struggle is the birthplace of empathy, curiosity, art. Take away the friction, and the story collapses. A life without difficulty isn't peace, it's flatness. The heart, like the universe, expands through tension. Without resistance, there's no melody, just noise. And still, amid this chaos of progress, small miracles keep happening. A child learns to read. A stranger saves a stranger. Someone forgives what should have been unforgivable. These moments don't make headlines, but they're the real proof that humanity is evolving. Not in technology, but in tenderness. The quiet revolutions are always the ones that last. They're the reason why, no matter how many wars we wage, something in us still believes in kindness. Maybe that's the secret we've been circling all along. That the end of fear doesn't come from dominance or discovery, but from understanding, from realizing that control was never the point. Connection was. Every story we've told, every empire we've built, every mistake we've made was just another way of reaching out in the dark, trying to find each other. And when we do, even for a fleeting second, the whole world feels bearable again. Because for all our contradictions, our genius and stupidity, our cruelty and compassion, there's one truth that refuses to die. We care. Against all evidence, against all odds, we still care. That's why we fight, why we build, why we grieve, why we laugh. The world may never be fixed, but maybe it doesn't need to be. Maybe the point was never to win the war, but to remember that even in the middle of it, we're capable of love. And that, in the end, might be enough. There's a peculiar silence that comes when humanity begins to realize it's out of excuses. Not the silence of peace, but the heavy, reflective kind that follows centuries of noise. It's the pause between one mistake and the next, that fragile heartbeat when we look around and finally ask, what have we actually learned? We like to think history moves in straight lines, marching forward with flags and slogans, but it doesn't. It spirals. Every revolution is just the past wearing new shoes. We keep walking, convinced the scenery has changed, unaware that we're tracing the same path in a slightly fancier circle. It's almost funny how every generation believes it's the one that finally gets it. Ancient Greeks thought philosophy would save the world. Victorians thought industrial progress would. We think therapy and Wi-Fi will do the trick. Each era has its holy grail of enlightenment, and each ends up discovering that humans remain beautifully, stubbornly human. We can invent artificial intelligence, but we still forget birthdays. We can decode DNA, but we still argue over parking spots. Maybe progress is less about becoming better and more about finding new ways to make the same mistakes with style. Take our obsession with control, for example. We've built entire industries dedicated to managing the chaos of existence. Planners, apps, spreadsheets, spiritual retreats, where people pay to schedule their unscheduled time. It's a performance of calmness, a ballet of busy minds pretending to be serene. Control feels safe because it tricks us into thinking uncertainty can be negotiated. But the universe has never signed a contract with us. It doesn't care about our plans. One gust of wind, one phone call, and everything rearranges itself. The irony is that the more we try to control life, the smaller our lives become. Like tightening a fist to hold water, we lose more the harder we grip. And yet, there's a strange beauty in that loss. The older we get, the more we understand that letting go isn't defeat, it's transformation. The seed has to break to become a tree. The wave has to crash to return to the sea. Even grief, unbearable as it is, reminds us that we loved deeply enough to mourn. Maybe that's why the most profound wisdom often hides inside heartbreak. When the ego finally gets tired of pretending to be immortal, the soul quietly takes over and says, "Welcome, now we can begin." Still, the human ego is nothing if not persistent. We invent entire mythologies just to avoid humility. Look at how we treat time, as if it's our personal possession. We spend it, save it, waste it, as though the clock were a bank account we could negotiate with. In reality, time doesn't belong to us. We belong to it. The universe is patient, but it's not sentimental. It doesn't care how well you multitask before you turn to dust. Yet somehow, knowing that makes everything more precious. Mortality, that most inconvenient truth, is also the reason a sunrise still feels miraculous. Even our flaws have a strange poetry to them. Humans are walking contradictions. Fragile but resilient, selfish but kind, terrified but endlessly curious. We destroy what we love, then write songs about the loss. We build cities that choke the sky, then complain the stars are gone. And still, we never stop reaching upward, never stop trying to bring light into the dark. There's something noble in that, even if it's a little absurd. Maybe absurdity is our truest art form, the ability to keep trying in a universe that owes us nothing. Sometimes I wonder if that's why laughter feels so sacred. It's the sound of surrender disguised as joy, a moment when we stop pretending to understand and just marvel at how ridiculous it all is. Imagine explaining human life to an alien. We eat plants to survive, then buy flowers to apologize for the things we said while hungry. No wonder the cosmos stays quiet. Maybe it's too polite to interrupt. But humor, as it turns out, might be the closest thing we have to enlightenment. It bridges the gap between tragedy and understanding. It allows us to see our own foolishness without collapsing under the weight of it. That's why the wisest people often sound like comedians. They've made peace with the punchline. The Buddha smiled, after all. Maybe he just finally got the joke. What's remarkable is how, despite everything, the wars, the greed, the heartbreak, humanity keeps choosing to believe in something more. Every generation has its cynics, but even they get quiet when faced with kindness that expects nothing in return. The simple act of caring remains our most radical invention. It's the one thing technology can't automate, the one resource that grows the more we share it. Kindness is the rebellion that history never manages to suppress, and perhaps that's where the real revolution begins. Not with fire or fury, but with awareness. The recognition that we've been here before, that the same fears and desires have shaped every era, and that maybe the point was never to escape the cycle, but to understand it, to live consciously within it. The universe isn't a puzzle to be solved, it's a conversation to be continued. We are, each of us, both question and answer, both storm and shelter. Maybe the end of this story isn't the fall of humanity or its triumph, but its awakening. The moment we stop seeing ourselves as separate from the chaos and start recognizing that we are the chaos, trying to make sense of itself, the universe dreaming with open eyes. And if that's true, then every laugh, every tear, every act of grace, they're all part of the same language. The same attempt to say, across millennia and mistakes, that being human, for all its madness, was always worth it. Maybe every story about humanity is really a story about recognition, the slow, sometimes painful realization that the monsters we've been fighting were wearing our faces all along. The ancient myths knew this before we did. Dragons, demons, devils, all metaphors with bad breath and good timing. We use them to explain what we didn't want to admit about ourselves. It's easier to draw a creature than to face your own reflection, but sooner or later every civilization discovers the same truth. The real battle was never between good and evil, it was between awareness and denial. You can see that in how people respond to power. Give someone a little authority, a title, a key card, maybe a blue check mark, and watch what happens. The posture changes first, then the tone of voice. Suddenly, the same person who once complained about rules is now enforcing them with religious zeal. It's not because power corrupts, it's because it reveals. It shows what was already there, hiding under the polite layers of fear and insecurity. We like to think we're complex creatures, but half of human behavior can be explained by two basic desires: to be seen and to be safe. The tragedy is that most people confuse the two. There's a kind of tragic comedy in the way we search for identity. We join tribes, movements, fandoms, anything that promises belonging. And yet, the moment we belong, we start defining who doesn't. It's a paradox older than language, unity through exclusion. Every group starts as a promise of love and ends as a list of enemies. Even the most peaceful communities eventually split over something ridiculous: the placement of a comma, the interpretation of a rule, the temperature of the room. Wars have started over less. It's funny until you realize it's not. What's fascinating is how we keep inventing new ways to divide ourselves while using the same vocabulary of righteousness. In ancient times, it was religion. Now it's politics, culture, identity. The words change, the passion doesn't. The same speeches that once justified crusades now justify comment sections. It's remarkable how the human brain can turn anything into moral warfare. You could hand people a spoon, and within a week, they'd form two opposing movements: Team Scoop and Team Stir, and both would insist they're defending civilization. Underneath it all lies the fear of irrelevance. To admit that your opinion might not matter in the grand scheme of things feels unbearable. So we raise our voices, gather allies, and build echo chambers to amplify our existence. That's the secret behind every movement and every outrage. The desperate attempt to prove that our small story fits inside the big one. And maybe that's not entirely wrong. Maybe the universe needs our noise to stay awake. Still, you have to wonder if it ever looks down at us and thinks, they're adorable, but exhausting. And yet, for all the noise, there are moments of disarming clarity when someone somewhere simply stops. When the shouting loses its rhythm and a strange quiet takes over, that's when understanding sneaks in, not as a grand revelation, but as a sigh. The realization that you don't have to win to be right, that not every disagreement is a war, and that most of the enemies you've imagined were probably just scared too. It's an uncomfortable truth, Peace doesn't feel like victory. It feels like humility. Humility, of course, isn't a popular product. You can't monetize it, you can't post it, and you definitely can't weaponize it. It's not glamorous to say, I don't know. The algorithm doesn't reward self-awareness, it rewards certainty. That's why arrogance spreads faster than compassion. It looks better on camera. But every so often, someone breaks through the noise. A voice, quiet and steady, cutting through the performance with something so rare it feels revolutionary. Sincerity. It's fragile, but it travels farther than shouting ever could. If you look closely, you'll notice that history's real turning points were born from moments like that. Not grand speeches, not victories, but small human recognitions. A hand extended instead of a fist. A pause before retaliation. A decision to understand instead of dominate. Those moments rarely make headlines, but they're the hinge points of civilization. Empires rise and fall on the strength of armies. Humanity rises and falls on the strength of empathy. It's almost poetic how the smallest gestures carry the greatest weight. Think of the first person who offered water to a stranger instead of a weapon. Or the scientist who admitted they were wrong and opened the door to a new discovery. Or the parent who broke a generational curse by choosing patience over anger. These are the quiet revolutions that never end. They don't erase the darkness, they just teach us how to see in it. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the goal was never to escape the flaws that make us human, but to learn how to dance with them. The light isn't the absence of shadow, it's the awareness of it. Every mistake, every contradiction, every laugh in the face of despair, they're all part of the same choreography. It's messy, awkward, and endlessly imperfect, but it's ours. The same hands that build weapons also cradle newborns. The same voices that shout in anger can sing lullabies. We contain the entire spectrum, and maybe redemption isn't about choosing one side, but learning how to hold them both without breaking. So perhaps the greatest evolution won't come from science, or politics, or philosophy. It'll come from a single, quiet shift, when we stop trying to prove we're right and start wondering what it would mean to simply be kind. That might sound small, almost trivial, but in a world addicted to noise, gentleness might be the loudest rebellion of all. And when that moment finally arrives, when the shouting fades and we meet each other without armor, maybe, just maybe, we'll realize that the monsters were never here to be slain. They were here to be understood. It's strange how the closer we get to understanding ourselves, the more complicated the mirror becomes. We've mapped the stars, decoded the genome, and built machines that can think faster than their creators, yet we still can't seem to figure out why we cry at songs we've heard 100 times, or why silence feels heavier when someone we love isn't in the room. The great cosmic joke is that we keep looking outward for meaning when everything worth knowing hides inside the parts of ourselves we're too afraid to visit. The universe doesn't owe us answers, it just keeps handing us better questions. Maybe that's why humans love stories. Not the kind printed in books, but the ones we live in every day. Stories are how we trick ourselves into believing there's a pattern, that our pain is building toward something. They give chaos a rhythm, like subtitles for emotions we can't quite translate. It's no coincidence that the oldest human artifacts aren't weapons or tools, but cave paintings. Proof that before we learned how to survive, we learned how to narrate survival. And that hasn't changed much. We still measure our lives by the stories we tell about them, the triumphs, the betrayals, the quiet moments no one saw. Sometimes, the telling is more important than the truth itself. We like to think that progress has made us smarter, but all it's really done is make our distractions prettier. The ancient philosophers sat under trees and wondered about existence. We scroll through infinite feeds, asking the same thing, but with worse posture. Technology has given us godlike access to information and toddler-like attention spans. We can summon entire libraries with our thumbs, yet we use that power mostly to argue with strangers we'll never meet. Maybe that's the modern paradox. We've never been more connected and never felt lonelier. It's almost poetic if you tilt your head and squint. What's ironic is that loneliness isn't a defect, it's proof of consciousness. It's the ache that reminds us we're separate, aware, alive. Even in prehistoric times, people gathered around fires not just for warmth, but for company against the echo of their own thoughts. That instinct hasn't left us. It just migrated to brighter screens. The digital fire still burns, only now we huddle around it, looking for validation instead of stories. But sometimes, amid the scrolling, you stumble upon something real, a post, a photo, a sentence, that makes you pause. And in that pause, you remember that beneath all the algorithms and noise, there's still a pulse. The truth is, for all our inventions, humanity's greatest technology has always been empathy. It's what allows us to feel someone else's joy or pain as if it were our own. It's what built communities, inspired revolutions, and occasionally saved us from ourselves. The problem is that empathy doesn't scale well. It thrives in small doses, face to face, heartbeat to heartbeat. The moment you try to industrialize it, it becomes marketing. We talk about global compassion, as if kindness were an export, but in reality, it happens in moments too small to film. A shared glance, a quiet understanding, an act of forgiveness no one will ever know about. Those are the places where humanity hides when the headlines say it's gone. And yet, We're terrified of vulnerability, even though it's the soil where empathy grows. We build walls, both literal and emotional, pretending they protect us when all they do is isolate us further. It's as if we keep trying to invent ways to avoid being human, editing our photos, curating our personalities, even outsourcing our emotions to artificial intelligence that pretends to care. But pretending is something we've always been good at. Whole civilizations have been built on the illusion of control, only to collapse the moment someone asks an honest question. Maybe that's the secret every empire misses, that strength without softness eventually eats itself alive. Humor is the only thing that keeps this truth from breaking us. The ability to laugh at our absurdity is humanity's pressure valve. Imagine being a species intelligent enough to build nuclear weapons, but clumsy enough to trip over a shoelace. It's hilarious and horrifying at the same time. Laughter doesn't erase the pain, but it rearranges it into something we can carry. The cynic calls it coping. The poet calls it grace. Either way, it's the most human reflex we have left. Because if we can still laugh, it means the story isn't over. And maybe that's what this whole experiment was about from the beginning. Not perfection, not conquest, not progress, but persistence. The willingness to keep showing up even when everything feels pointless. The first humans who stared at the night sky didn't need to understand it. They just needed to keep looking. That same wonder still lives in us, beneath the layers of irony and fatigue. Every time we love someone, create something, or forgive the unforgivable, we're participating in the same rebellion that began around those ancient fires, choosing connection over despair. In the end, maybe humanity's legacy won't be the monuments we built or the machines we invented, but the small, stubborn decision to care. Against all evidence, against all logic, we keep believing that kindness matters, that beauty is worth chasing, that tomorrow could still surprise us. That's what makes us both ridiculous and divine. The fact that we know we're flawed, and we still reach for the stars anyway. Maybe that's the final act of courage, to exist fully in a world that never promised to understand us and to love it anyway. Because in that simple, impossible act, the universe finally sees its own reflection and smiles back. There's a peculiar ache that lives at the center of being human, the awareness that everything we build, love, and believe in will someday vanish, and yet we keep building, loving, and believing anyway. It's madness, but it's also magnificent. Maybe that's the closest thing we have to meaning, to keep creating in the face of inevitable loss, as if defiance itself were a sacred act. Every civilization, every generation has felt that same pulse, the quiet whisper that says, go on, even when logic says, stop. And so we do. We paint cathedrals over crumbling bones, plant trees whose shade we'll never sit under, and fall in love knowing perfectly well how it ends. It's irrational, but it's the kind of irrational that keeps the stars burning. Sometimes I think the universe designed us with too much awareness and not enough instruction. We can feel infinity pressing against our small lives, but have no idea what to do with it. So we fill the gap with rituals. Birthdays, anniversaries, resolutions, all these tiny attempts to measure the immeasurable. They're comforting in the same way children lining up toys for bedtime are comforting. It doesn't stop the night from coming, but it makes the dark feel organized. And that's the heart of it, isn't it? We don't want control over life. We just want it to make sense long enough to breathe. That's why we cling to stories, even when we know they're fragile. Myths once explained thunder and death. Now they explain heartbreak and identity. We've traded Olympus for psychology, gods for algorithms, but the desire is the same, to believe that chaos has subtitles. The danger isn't in believing, it's in forgetting that the stories are metaphors, not manuals. A society that confuses its metaphors with facts starts to rot from the inside. We've seen it 1,000 times, Rome, Egypt, the modern West. The names change, but the pattern hums like background music. Every culture eventually mistakes its own reflection for divine truth. Still, there's something endearingly human about that arrogance. We build monuments to ourselves as if permanence were a personality trait. The pyramids were supposed to defy time. Now they're tourist attractions with gift shops. The Romans etched eternity into stone, and centuries later, we sell replicas of their columns on the internet. The irony is delicious. Even our attempts at immortality have expiration dates. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the point of leaving a mark isn't to last forever, but to remind whoever comes next that we were here, trying, failing, loving, and laughing in the same confused way they will. Humor, after all, might be the only honest reaction to existence. Think about it. We're tiny creatures spinning on a rock that's hurling through space at unimaginable speed, worried about things like credit scores and traffic lights. The absurdity of it all is breathtaking. Laughter doesn't mean we don't care. It means we've accepted the joke. Every time someone laughs in the face of despair, the universe loses a little of its power to scare us. It's like we're winking back at infinity and saying, nice try. And maybe that's where our real strength hides. Not in dominance or invention, but in the courage to stay tender in a world that punishes vulnerability. To care deeply, even when caring hurts. To forgive, even when anger feels easier. Empathy is not weakness. It's rebellion. It's the refusal to let cynicism have the final word. The truth is, kindness has always been the most radical idea in history. Every empire feared it, Every revolution rediscovered it. Every heart secretly longs for it. We talk about love as if it were fragile, but in reality, it's the most indestructible thing we've ever created. Still, we keep trying to outgrow it, as if emotion were an outdated feature. We hide behind logic, build walls of irony, pretend that caring too much is embarrassing, but all that armor just makes the fall harder when life inevitably cracks it open, because it will. The world has a way of humbling everyone, one way or another. That's the beauty of it. No one escapes being human. You can earn all the degrees, make all the money, master every self-help philosophy, and still find yourself crying in a grocery store aisle because you saw an old woman buying flowers alone. It's the universality of fragility that keeps us connected. And connection, more than anything, is what we crave. Not just the social kind, but the spiritual one. The quiet sense that our existence touches something beyond itself. Religion tried to define it, science tried to measure it, but maybe it's simpler than both. Maybe it's that moment when you look at a stranger and, for no reason, feel an ancient familiarity. The brief flash when you realize that beneath the noise, we're all terrified, hopeful, ridiculous, and miraculous in exactly the same way. That recognition is grace in disguise, the understanding that we were never meant to conquer the world, only to belong to it. And perhaps that's the final act of wisdom, to stop trying to win at life and start participating in it, to see every ending as part of a larger breath, every loss as a rehearsal for gratitude. When we finally stop treating the universe as a puzzle to solve and start seeing it as a conversation, everything changes. The silence stops being threatening. It becomes an invitation. The chaos stops feeling random. It becomes music we haven't learned how to dance to yet. So maybe the answer was never hiding in the stars or buried in the data. Maybe it's been here the whole time. In the quiet resilience of laughter, the defiance of love, the courage of vulnerability. The human story was never about perfection. It was about persistence, about looking at the infinite and saying, we're small, but we're still here. And in the grand theater of existence, that might just be the most extraordinary performance of all. Maybe the hardest truth to swallow about being human is that most of what we call understanding is really just storytelling in disguise. We don't see the world as it is, we see it as we need it to be. Every person carries a small private mythology, a narrative that explains why things happen, who they are, and what it all means. And like any good myth, it's full of half-truths and exaggerations, but that's what makes it work. Reality is too sharp to hold with bare hands, so we wrap it in meaning and call it purpose. You can see this instinct everywhere, in religion, in politics, in personal goals. Even the most rational person secretly lives by superstition. Maybe they don't knock on wood, but they believe in the right time or the right person. We build calendars and destinies out of coincidences and call them fate. It's endearing, really, how desperate we are to find pattern in chaos. The universe keeps shouting randomness, and we keep answering, no, this must be about me. It's narcissism, but at least it's creative. Take memory, for instance. It's supposed to be a record of truth, but in practice, it's more like an improv show. We edit, exaggerate, skip scenes, and add music where it didn't belong. A moment that was merely awkward turns into humiliation. A small kindness becomes a grand act of love, and before long, we're starring in a biopic that no one else remembers the same way. That's the funny thing about nostalgia. It doesn't transport you back in time, it just makes the past more flattering. Yet, maybe that's not a flaw, maybe it's a feature. The human brain isn't built for accuracy. It's built for survival. Facts are boring. They don't feed the soul. Stories do. Stories let us wake up after loss and tell ourselves it meant something. They let us turn failure into growth, heartbreak into wisdom, and pain into poetry. If evolution had been purely logical, we'd be practical and joyless machines. Instead, we cry at movies and name our pets after dead relatives. Biology can't explain that kind of madness. Only art can. Of course, art has its own cruelty. The same imagination that paints beauty also invents monsters. That's why fear has always been humanity's favorite creative outlet. We turn shadows into demons, oceans into gods, and silence into the sound of our own anxiety. Even today, fear is the most reliable way to unite people, which is both terrifying and oddly efficient. Politicians know it, advertisers know it, even algorithms know it. The best way to keep someone watching is to convince them something terrible might happen if they look away. Humanity's attention span is held hostage by its own paranoia. But in the middle of that fear, something miraculous happens. We connect. Shared terror is oddly intimate. It's why strangers bond on airplanes during turbulence or in comment sections during global crises. Panic reminds us that, deep down, we're the same trembling species trying to make sense of the thunder. It's almost funny that it takes chaos to remind us of connection. Maybe the apocalypse isn't coming to destroy us. Maybe it's just trying to make us talk to each other again. And yet, for all our fear, for all our clumsy attempts to manage it, we keep choosing to love, over and over again, against reason and evidence. We know love ends, we know it breaks us, and still we chase it like moths to a candle. Maybe it's not courage that makes people love. Maybe it's denial. Or maybe love is the only thing stubborn enough to make sense in a senseless universe. It's the one story that never gets old because it's the only one we keep rewriting with every generation. What's incredible is how much power we give it. Empires have fallen because two people couldn't keep their hands off each other. Whole wars have been started over jealousy dressed as honor. Romeo and Juliet might have died centuries ago, but they're alive in every couple who mistakes obsession for destiny. Still, love is also the reason humanity keeps rebuilding after every collapse. It's both our greatest weakness and our best excuse for continuing. Because when you love, truly love, the world stops being theoretical. It becomes urgent, intimate, worth saving. And maybe that's where wisdom begins. Not in knowing the answers, but in realizing how precious the questions are. Every time someone falls in love, writes a poem, or forgives someone who doesn't deserve it, the human story resets itself. That's our secret superpower. The ability to forget how many times we've failed and try again anyway. Even the cynics can't escape it. They roll their eyes at romance and meaning, but you can tell they still care. You don't mock something unless it matters to you. The older we get, the funnier it becomes to realize that life never really clicks. There's no final act of understanding, no grand revelation that makes it all make sense. You just get better at laughing at the confusion. That's what aging really is, mastering the art of cosmic irony. You start to see that every joy carries a shadow, every tragedy hides a gift, and every person you meet is just as lost as you. The world becomes less of a test and more of a theater. Some days you're the actor, some days the audience, and on rare occasions, you remember you're also the script. And perhaps that's the most hopeful part of all, that we're still writing. Still improvising meaning out of the absurd. The show hasn't ended. The curtain hasn't dropped. Somewhere, someone is falling in love. Another is forgiving. Another is daring to laugh at their own pain. It's messy, tragic, hilarious, and completely human. The universe may be infinite, but this fragile, stubborn, beautifully absurd performance is uniquely ours. And if there's any justice in creation, it's that even after the lights go out, the echo of our laughter might just keep traveling through the dark, refusing, as always, to be silenced. There's a peculiar tenderness in realizing that humanity's greatest achievements often come from its deepest insecurities. We build monuments because we're afraid of being forgotten. We write love songs because we're terrified of being alone. And we chase perfection because we can't stand the thought of being ordinary. Every masterpiece is, at its core, an apology to the universe, a way of saying, I know I'm small, but I tried to make it beautiful. That's the paradox of creation. It's born not from confidence, but from doubt that refuses to give up. Somewhere along the way, though, we confused ambition with meaning. We started mistaking movement for progress, noise for importance, and visibility for worth. Modern life is a race where no one remembers why they started running. We schedule every minute, answer every notification, then wonder why our souls feel like they're buffering. We've built a civilization that can send images across galaxies, but struggles to make eye contact at dinner. The irony is almost poetic. The species that conquer distance can't handle silence. But maybe that's the price of awareness. Consciousness is both gift and burden. We don't just live, we observe ourselves living, constantly narrating, editing, comparing. The mind, that brilliant invention, never stops broadcasting. Even when no one's listening, it whispers regrets at 2 a.m., replays conversations from 2014, and keeps a running list of everything we might have done differently. It's like carrying a talk show host in your head who refuses to go off air. And yet, for all its chaos, that same mind can imagine symphonies, solve equations, and invent kindness out of nothing. It's exhausting, but miraculous. What's funny is that we keep pretending we'll eventually figure it all out, as if life were a crossword puzzle and enlightenment the final clue. But maybe it's not supposed to be solved. Maybe meaning is less like a destination and more like a dance. You find it in motion, not in mastery. The philosophers have been arguing about the purpose of existence for thousands of years, but the answer might have been sitting quietly in a bakery this whole time, disguised as the smell of bread. Meaning doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It shows up when you're too busy living to notice. We chase certainty like it's oxygen, but uncertainty is where everything interesting happens. Every discovery, every love story, every great adventure starts with not knowing. The problem is that our egos hate it. We want guarantees, safety nets, warranties for the soul. That's why we invented religion, politics, and insurance. All brilliant ways to pretend the unknown can be managed. But the truth is, mystery is the only thing keeping the universe from being unbearably dull. Imagine if we actually had all the answers. No questions left, no curiosity, just eternal clarity. That's not paradise. That's customer service. Even science, which we love to imagine as pure logic, thrives on uncertainty. Every breakthrough begins with confusion. Newton saw an apple fall and didn't just eat it. He wondered why. Curiosity, not control, is what keeps us evolving. The moment we stop asking questions, we stop being human. That's why children are so extraordinary. They live in permanent wonder. Adults call it naive. Really, it's courage. It takes bravery to admit you don't know, especially in a world that worships confidence like it's a moral virtue. And yet, despite our hunger for answers, we keep falling for illusions: power, fame, wealth, the big shiny lies that promise fulfillment but deliver paperwork. People spend decades climbing ladders only to realize they were leaning against the wrong wall. The funniest part is that the things that actually make life bearable, friendship, laughter, sunlight, music, are free and infinitely available. But because they don't have price tags, we undervalue them. The universe has a wicked sense of humor that way. It hides the good stuff in plain sight. Still, there's hope in our clumsiness. The fact that we keep reaching, fumbling, creating, it means we haven't given up on ourselves yet. Even our mistakes are evidence of faith. Every wrong turn implies the belief that there is a right one. We build and break and rebuild again, like children learning how to walk on cosmic legs. Maybe that's all evolution really is, a long series of beautiful stumbles toward awareness. And through all the noise and confusion, one truth keeps resurfacing. Everything we do, from the smallest gesture to the grandest invention, is an attempt to connect. That's the thread tying it all together. The desire to be seen, understood, remembered. We want to touch the world in a way that says, I was here and I cared. Maybe that's what makes love so powerful. It's the one language that doesn't need translation. You can speak it with your hands, your eyes, or just your presence. It's fragile, yes, but also the most persistent force in the universe. Perhaps that's the final, quiet realization, that we were never meant to conquer the chaos, only to find grace within it. Life isn't a test, it's a rehearsal. Every mistake is just a forgotten line, every loss a scene change. The show doesn't need to be perfect to be worth watching. And when the curtain finally falls, maybe the measure of a life won't be how much we understood, but how deeply we felt. Because in the end, for all our noise and brilliance and confusion, we are still the universe learning how to love itself, one imperfect heartbeat at a time. Maybe the most fascinating thing about humanity is how we keep pretending we're new. Every generation walks around believing it invented anxiety, heartbreak, and sarcasm, as if cavemen weren't already grunting about taxes in their own way. We've always been this dramatic. The technology changes, the hairstyles evolve, but the emotions are the same ancient software still running on slightly glitchy hardware. It's both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it means we're not alone. Terrifying because it means we never really learn. History loves to masquerade as progress. We look at the past and laugh at its superstitions, then spend our own lives consulting horoscopes, personality quizzes, and algorithms to make decisions. Ancient priests read the stars, modern ones read stock charts. Both promised security, and both were wrong about half the time. The difference is that the old ones wore cooler robes. It's almost sweet how every era thinks it's the pinnacle of logic, right before it invents something catastrophic for convenience. Fire was great until it burned cities. The internet was great until it started burning minds. Progress, it turns out, is just chaos with better lighting. Still, we can't help ourselves. Humans are addicted to improvement, even when it makes us miserable. We tell ourselves we're building a better future, but half the time we're just running from the present. We chase efficiency like it's salvation: faster travel, faster food, faster communication, and then wonder why time still feels shorter. Somewhere between the wheel and the Wi-Fi, we forgot that speed and direction are not the same thing. We're moving faster than ever, but toward what? No one knows. Probably another meeting. But here's the twist. Even in our confusion, we keep finding beauty. We trip, we fall, we panic, and somehow we still look up at the stars with wonder, as if expecting them to answer. And maybe that's what makes us special. Not our intelligence or our inventions, but our capacity to hope, even when we have no idea what we're hoping for. The same species that invented nuclear weapons also invented lullabies. That contradiction isn't a flaw, it's the design. We are equal parts danger and tenderness, survival and poetry. Think about it. The entire history of humankind could be summarized as an ongoing argument between fear and curiosity. Fear builds walls, curiosity opens doors. Fear keeps us alive, but curiosity is what makes life worth surviving. Every discovery started with someone ignoring fear long enough to ask, what if? It's a dangerous question, but without it, we'd still be hiding in caves complaining about the Wi-Fi signal. And the funny thing is, the people who ask what if never think they're changing the world. They just can't resist poking the unknown to see if it pokes back. Of course, poking the unknown often hurts. Curiosity gave us medicine, but it also gave us social media. It taught us how to fly, and then how to drop things from the sky. It's as if humanity has two hands that never quite agree. One creates, the other deletes. We keep rewriting the world in pen when maybe we should have been using pencil. But even in our biggest disasters, there's a strange kind of learning. And the way a child learns not to touch the stove, only on a much more expensive scale. It's tempting to think we're more civilized now, but deep down, we still crave spectacle. Ancient Romans filled arenas to watch gladiators fight. Today we refresh the news or scroll through comment sections still hungry for blood. Only now it's reputational instead of physical. Civilization didn't end the appetite for chaos. It just taught us how to disguise it as entertainment. Somewhere, a philosopher once said that society becomes decadent when it starts confusing drama for meaning. By that definition, we're practically gourmet chefs of decadence. And yet, amid all that noise, real moments still find their way through. Quiet gestures that remind us of what matters. A stranger's kindness, a shared laugh, a moment of awe so pure it silences the commentary in your head. Those are the moments that survive long after empires fall. The rest, the power struggles, the trends, the hashtags, will dissolve into dust. What lasts are the small human flashes: love, curiosity, laughter. The universe has been recycling those ingredients for billions of years because, apparently, they work. Maybe that's the secret no one tells you. History isn't a straight line toward perfection. It's a spiral, looping back on itself, testing our memory, asking if we've learned anything this time. Sometimes we do. Usually we just rename the problem and call it innovation. But in that endless loop lies a kind of grace. Because every time we return to the same mistakes, we also return to the same capacity for wonder. We rediscover what it means to care, to question, to begin again. And that might be the real miracle of our species. Not that we're wise, but that we're relentless. We keep waking up despite knowing how fragile everything is. We keep falling in love despite how often it breaks us. We keep building things that will outlive us, as if trying to convince the future that we mattered. It's foolish, noble, hilarious, and profoundly human. The universe may not notice, but we do it anyway. Because somewhere deep down, we know that the only thing more tragic than failing is refusing to try. So here we are, still fumbling, still learning, still laughing at the absurdity of it all. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the point was never to reach perfection, but to stay awake through the chaos, to feel it, question it, joke about it, and keep creating anyway. Because if there's one thing humanity has always been brilliant at, it's turning confusion into art. And as long as we can still do that, as long as we can still find humor in the heartbreak and wonder in the noise, then perhaps, against all logic, we're exactly where we're supposed to be. Maybe what makes being human so unbearably beautiful is that we keep searching for peace in a world that was never designed to sit still. The earth itself never stopped spinning, the oceans never stopped moving, and our hearts, even at rest, never stopped beating. Still, we imagine peace as this still pond of eternal calm, a kind of emotional Wi-Fi connection that never drops. But real peace isn't silence, it's rhythm. It's the quiet understanding that chaos isn't the enemy, it's the soundtrack. That's the thing about life. It never stops rehearsing, and yet the performance never feels ready. We're all improvising lines we didn't write, in scenes we didn't choose, pretending we know our cues. It's awkward, sure, but also kind of miraculous. There's a strange grace in the clumsiness, like watching someone trip and turn it into a dance. Maybe that's the secret nobody teaches you. Peace isn't about control, it's about choreography. Learning to move with what you can't predict, to laugh when the universe forgets its script. The funniest part is how we keep outsourcing our happiness as if joy were a delivery service running late. We say, I'll be happy when I get the job, or when I find love, or when I lose the weight. Meanwhile, happiness is sitting quietly in the corner waving like, hey, I've been here the whole time. You just never make eye contact. We treat joy like an achievement when it's really an awareness. You don't chase it, you notice it. It's the smell of coffee, the sound of someone laughing from another room, the absurdity of realizing you're alive in a galaxy that doesn't even know your name. And yet, we insist on turning existence into a competition. We've turned comparison into a national sport. Social media didn't invent envy, it just gave it better filters. We scroll through the highlight reels of strangers and wonder why our lives feel like blooper reels. But the truth is, no one's really winning. Everyone's just editing. Even the happiest looking people are negotiating their own private wars. The irony is that we keep trying to look perfect to impress people who are too busy pretending to notice. It's a global masquerade, and everyone's exhausted. Maybe that's why humor feels like salvation. Because laughter is the only moment we forget to perform. When something is truly funny, the mask falls off. You can't fake genuine laughter. It's raw, unfiltered truth wearing a ridiculous costume. That's why it feels so holy. It reminds us that deep down, we're all the same. Fragile, hopeful, ridiculous creatures trying to find dignity in chaos. I think that's why we love comedians so much. They translate pain into punchlines. They remind us that if you can laugh at the absurdity, it can't completely own you. But laughter has a twin, silence. And the two are in constant conversation. After the laughter fades, there's that brief stillness where reflection sneaks in. You start realizing how much of life isn't about adding things, but subtracting what weighs you down. Simplicity, it turns out, is not minimalism for aesthetics. It's rebellion against noise. The older you get, the more sacred quiet becomes. You stop needing to prove so much, explain so much, collect so much. You learn that what's left after you stop chasing everything is who you actually are. And that realization, that self-awareness creeping in through the cracks of exhaustion, is both liberating and uncomfortable. Because once you see yourself clearly, you can't unsee it. You start noticing how often fear disguises itself as logic. How many practical decisions were really just postponed dreams? How many apologies you owe to your own younger self? It's humbling, like realizing you've been holding your breath for decades and finally deciding to exhale. Still, awareness alone isn't enlightenment. Knowing yourself doesn't mean you suddenly stop making mistakes. It just means you start recognizing the patterns sooner. Like, yes, here I am. Repeating that same bad decision, but with better lighting? Growth isn't linear. It's a loop with slightly improved dialogue. Every new version of yourself still forgets things the old one already learned. Maybe that's why forgiveness, real forgiveness, starts to matter. Not just for others, but for yourself. You can't evolve if you're still punishing your past for not knowing what your present knows. It's funny how we talk about moving on as if it were a straight path, when really it's a messy dance between holding on and letting go. Healing is slow, awkward, and deeply unglamorous. It's less like a sunrise and more like a flickering light bulb that works just often enough to keep you from giving up. And that's enough. Because life isn't about erasing scars. It's about learning how to wear them with grace and to say, yes, I was broken, but look how the light gets in now. And maybe that's where peace finally lives, not in the absence of pain, but in the refusal to let it define you. The world will always be loud, unpredictable, occasionally absurd. People will disappoint you, time will betray you, plans will collapse. But in the middle of it all, there will also be laughter and kindness and tiny moments of wonder that make it all worth surviving. Maybe that's the point. Not to find meaning once and for all, but to keep finding it again and again in unexpected places. Because if there's one thing life keeps teaching, sometimes gently, sometimes with a sledgehammer, it's that everything, even chaos, carries its own kind of rhythm. You just have to learn how to listen without demanding a melody. And once you do, once you start dancing with it instead of resisting it, you realize something astonishing. Peace was never the destination. It was the music playing underneath the noise all along, waiting for you to stop, laugh, and finally hear it. There's a strange comfort in realizing that nobody really knows what they're doing. Everyone, from the most powerful politician to the most humble barista, is basically improvising with varying levels of confidence. We all wake up, choose a costume, rehearse a few lines, and hope the day doesn't turn into a farce. Some people are better actors, that's all. The rest of us are just trying not to trip over the props. And yet, beneath the chaos, there's a quiet poetry. The idea that maybe life isn't meant to be mastered, only experienced. The obsession with control is one of our funniest collective delusions. We plan vacations down to the minute, as if the weather reads our itineraries. We try to manifest outcomes like the universe is some cosmic customer service line. And when life inevitably ignores our requests, we call it unfair. But maybe it's not unfair. Maybe it's just uncustomized. The truth is, the world doesn't revolve around our preferences. It revolves, period. Everything else is our ego throwing a tantrum because it didn't get the starring role. What's remarkable, though, is how resilient the human spirit is in the face of disappointment. We can lose everything, a job, a person, a belief, and still find reasons to get up, to cook breakfast, to laugh at a dumb meme. That's the miracle no religion fully explains. That even in despair, life keeps leaking light through the cracks. The sheer absurdity of it all becomes its own kind of grace. Like when you're crying in your car and your favorite song starts playing at the exact wrong right moment, and you can't tell if the universe is mocking you or consoling you. Either way, you smile. It's funny how we romanticize meaning as if it's some treasure buried in the mountains. We search for it in careers and relationships, in self-improvement seminars with bad lighting and overpriced coffee. But meaning isn't hidden, it's scattered. Tiny, ordinary fragments scattered across the day. The smell of rain, the way a stranger holds the door, the taste of something sweet when you least expect it. Meaning isn't found in grand gestures, but in moments that refuse to announce themselves, and maybe that's why we keep missing it. Because we're too busy chasing the cinematic version of our lives. We want the sweeping soundtrack, the slow-motion kiss, the redemptive third act. But real life is more indie film than blockbuster. The lighting's weird, the dialogue's messy, and sometimes the ending doesn't make sense. Yet it's precisely that imperfection that makes it real. If everything went according to script, there'd be no tension, no laughter, no story. The plot holes are what keep us awake. Humor, of course, is our best coping mechanism for those plot holes. When the absurdity gets too heavy, laughter becomes a lifeline. Think about how ridiculous it is that we exist. Tiny creatures made mostly of water, stressing about Wi-Fi signals and what other bags of water think of us. From a cosmic perspective, that's hilarious. And yet, inside the joke, there's humility. Laughter reminds us that taking ourselves too seriously is the first step toward misery. It's not that life stops being tragic, it's just that comedy gives tragedy better timing. The problem is, we keep mistaking seriousness for depth. We think being solemn means being wise, as if joy were a sign of naivety. But maybe the wisest people are the ones who can still laugh. not because they don't see the darkness, but because they've made peace with it. They understand that pain doesn't need to be denied to be transformed. It just needs to be acknowledged with a wink. Humor isn't denial, it's rebellion. It's saying, yes, this hurts, but you can't have all of me. There's a beautiful irony in how laughter often arrives at the worst times. Funerals, breakups, hospital waiting rooms, places where the human heart, cornered by grief, decides to exhale through absurdity. It's the soul's way of reminding us that life goes on, even when we're not ready for it to. We think of laughter as fragile, but it's indestructible. It survives war, famine, heartbreak, even embarrassment. It's proof that hope isn't gone. It just changed its outfit. And beneath that laughter, something ancient hums. A recognition that we are temporary but connected. Every person you've ever met carries a version of the same story. Longing, loss, redemption, confusion. The details differ, the languages change, but the plot never does. Maybe that's why kindness feels so sacred. It's the only language that translates across every chapter. It's our way of saying, I see you in me. We underestimate how powerful that small recognition is. Empires crumble, technologies fade, but a moment of genuine empathy can outlive both. Perhaps that's what all of this and the chaos, the comedy, the heartbreak has been pointing toward. Not enlightenment as a destination, but awareness as a practice. The ability to witness the absurdity without trying to edit it, to love the contradictions instead of solving them. Life doesn't require a grand meaning to be meaningful. It just asks that we stay curious enough to keep showing up. The universe may not explain itself, but it keeps inviting us to dance, awkwardly, beautifully, endlessly, to the music we're still learning to hear. And maybe that's enough. There's a certain magic in how humans manage to make life both unbearable and beautiful at the same time. We're the only species capable of stressing over the meaning of existence while simultaneously arguing about pizza toppings. That's our genius. We live between the profound and the ridiculous, always unsure which one deserves more attention. Maybe that's why we keep oscillating between laughter and despair. They're both honest reactions to the same absurd truth. We're temporary creatures, trying to do something permanent. It's funny how we keep pretending we've got it figured out. People build entire philosophies around the idea of balance, as if life were a tightrope act that could ever be perfected. But balance isn't a destination. It's a brief moment before you start falling again. The trick isn't to stay upright forever. It's to enjoy the wobbling. That's where the real learning happens, somewhere between the stumble and the recovery. Yet, we treat imperfection like a personal failure instead of what it really is, the evidence that we're alive. If perfection existed, it would be boring. Imagine a world where no one made mistakes. No bad jokes, no wrong turns, no happy accidents. It would be efficient, yes, but completely soulless. Maybe that's why we romanticize chaos without realizing it. We say we want peace, but give us too much of it, and we start poking at the walls just to feel something again. Humanity is addicted to friction. It gives us stories to tell. Every scar, every disaster narrowly avoided becomes a badge of narrative. We can't resist turning pain into art. It's our most enduring survival instinct. If we can't escape the fire, we might as well describe it beautifully. And we do. We write poems about heartbreak, songs about loss, and comedies about the end of the world. It's our way of negotiating with fate. If you're going to break me, at least let it sound poetic. There's something oddly comforting about that. Even when everything falls apart, we instinctively reach for connection. It's like a reflex coded deep in our DNA, to reach out, to confess, to laugh through tears. The moment you tell someone, me too, the pain becomes lighter, not because it's gone, but because it's shared. That's what community really is. A shared illusion that somehow makes the suffering bearable. It's why strangers cry in the same movie theaters and cheer at the same stadiums. We may not understand one another's languages, but we understand loss, hope, and the need for belonging. The irony is that in trying so hard to connect, we often end up isolating ourselves. We curate our lives for public consumption, pretending to be transparent while carefully filtering out the truth. Authenticity has become a performance, a brand value, a marketing angle. We post about being real with lighting, good enough for a perfume ad. It's tragic and hilarious all at once. The more we try to prove we're human, the less human we become. The truth doesn't need to be polished, it just needs to be felt. But vulnerability isn't fashionable. It's risky, messy, unpredictable. And yet, those are the very qualities that make it irreplaceable. It's almost comic how we fight against our own nature. We invent self-help books to teach us things we already know but are too afraid to practice. Slow down, be kind, breathe. We pay for mindfulness retreats where someone literally reminds us how to exist. It's brilliant, really, monetizing the obvious. But maybe that's part of the joke. Deep down, we know the answers aren't complicated. They're just inconvenient. It's easier to buy a book about happiness than to sit quietly and face ourselves. The modern world thrives on distraction because silence is terrifying. It has the nerve to echo our thoughts back to us. And yet, in those rare moments when we do stop, when the noise finally fades, something extraordinary happens. The world starts to hum differently. You begin to notice small miracles that were always there. The way sunlight leaks through a window, the sound of distant laughter, the texture of the air before it rains. It's like life has been patiently waiting for you to notice it again. The grand truths we spend decades chasing are often hiding in the background, waiting for a pause long enough to reveal themselves. The problem isn't that life is meaningless, it's that we're too busy multitasking to notice its meaning. Still, we keep chasing progress, as if evolution were a sprint instead of an infinite loop. We want constant improvement. Better jobs, smarter phones, faster everything. But no one stops to ask, faster toward what? It's a strange contradiction. We dream of simplicity, but fear slowing down. Maybe that's because slowing down forces us to confront the one thing we can't control: time. And time, for all its quiet cruelty, is the most honest thing we'll ever meet. It doesn't care about our ambitions or regrets, it just moves. And somehow, in that indifference, there's freedom. If time doesn't hold grudges, maybe we don't have to either. There's a kind of gentle rebellion in accepting transience. It doesn't mean giving up, it means showing up differently, living as if every moment were a postcard instead of a contract. Maybe that's how wisdom actually begins, when we stop trying to own the story and start participating in it. Because the world isn't asking us to be perfect characters. It's asking us to be present ones, to show up, laugh when it's absurd, cry when it's unfair, and notice how miraculous it is that anything exists at all. And maybe that's what it's all been leading to. This awareness that meaning doesn't arrive fully formed. It accumulates, slowly, clumsily, beautifully. It's built from the moments we almost ignored, the laughter we didn't plan, the forgiveness we didn't think we could give. The more you look for purpose, the smaller it becomes. But when you stop looking and simply live, it grows. Quietly, patiently, like something that never needed your permission to bloom. And when it finally does, when you catch that fleeting glimpse of peace in the middle of the noise, you realize that life never hid its secret from you. It was whispering it all along, in every breath, every mistake, every laugh that made you forget, for just a moment, how temporary it all is. There's something oddly tender about how we spend our entire lives learning how to exist in the same place we were born. You'd think being alive would come with a manual, maybe even a tutorial level to get the hang of it. But no, we're just dropped into the chaos with a heartbeat and vague instructions like, try not to die and be nice sometimes. From there, we improvise. We copy what others do, assume they know what they're doing, and eventually realize they were improvising too. It's turtles all the way down, a whole species winging it with confidence. Maybe that's what makes humanity both infuriating and beautiful. We're creatures of uncertainty who crave certainty. We want everything labeled, measured, defined, but life refuses to sit still long enough for that. So we make up frameworks, philosophies, horoscopes, and self-help acronyms, all in the name of feeling like we're steering the ship. Meanwhile, the universe is probably watching us rearrange our furniture for better energy flow and thinking, that's adorable. They think they're in charge. And yet, there's wisdom hidden in our ridiculousness. Every superstition, every overcomplicated routine is really a tiny prayer disguised as control. The ritual of stirring coffee 3 times before drinking, the lucky shirt worn before job interviews, these are little negotiations with chaos. It's not logic, it's comfort. We're just trying to convince the universe we're paying attention. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the point isn't to control life, but to show up like we care enough to try. The funny part is how we keep measuring success as if it's a finish line we'll actually cross. We treat happiness like a delayed paycheck, something that'll arrive once we hit the next milestone. I'll be happy when I graduate, when I move, when I'm rich, when I finally stop caring. And it's sneaky, but every time we arrive, the goal quietly relocates itself, just far enough to keep us running. It's like chasing Wi-Fi in the woods. You get a signal for one blessed second, then it's gone again. The truth no one tells you is that the moment you stop sprinting, you realize the connection was inside the forest the whole time. And yet, standing still is terrifying. Stillness exposes all the thoughts we keep out of sight. The what-ifs, the regrets, the small humiliations we thought time had erased. So we keep moving, mistaking exhaustion for purpose. We glorify being busy like it's a moral virtue. Productivity has become our religion, one that promises salvation through spreadsheets and caffeine. But the price of constant motion is that we forget how to be present. We end up missing the very thing we were rushing toward. The irony is brutal, like sprinting to catch a sunset and realizing it was behind you the whole time. But sometimes, just sometimes, life forces you to stop. Illness, heartbreak, loss, the unwelcome teachers, the moments you can't schedule or delegate, they strip away the illusion of control, leaving only the essentials: breath, memory, feeling. Those moments, though painful, are also the most honest. They remind us that life isn't a performance, it's participation. It's not about having it all figured out. It's about showing up to the mess and saying, okay, what now? And the answer, surprisingly, is rarely dramatic. It's not find your destiny or unlock your hidden potential. It's usually something simple. Drink water. Call someone who loves you. Go outside and look at something that doesn't need you to fix it. The big answers tend to hide in small places because they know we're too distracted to look there. There's something almost comedic about that. The universe whispering truths we miss because we're too busy trying to optimize our morning routine. Even our attempts at self-discovery can turn into another form of performance. We meditate competitively, journal like we're submitting it for publication, and turn healing into a branding opportunity. But real growth is never glamorous. It's quiet, clumsy, unphotogenic. It's realizing you were wrong, apologizing to someone who deserved better, forgiving someone who will never apologize back. It's crying in the shower and laughing 5 minutes later because you slipped on the soap. It's absurd, humiliating, and deeply human. Maybe the point was never to find ourselves, but to lose the versions of ourselves we built for survival. The ones that say, don't feel too much, don't need too much, don't hope too loudly. Because hope, despite everything, is what keeps sneaking back in. No matter how many times the world disappoints us, some stubborn part of the soul still says, okay, one more try. It's the same impulse that makes people plant trees they'll never sit under or write love letters they'll never send. That's not foolishness. That's faith disguised as curiosity. And maybe that's the secret. Not the grand cinematic revelation we keep expecting, but the quiet acceptance that life is supposed to be this strange. That confusion isn't failure and uncertainty isn't punishment. We were never meant to have all the answers. We were meant to keep asking better questions. Maybe meaning isn't a puzzle to be solved, but a feeling that shows up when we stop trying to prove we're worthy of being here. So we keep living, awkwardly, bravely, beautifully. We spill coffee on important papers, laugh at the wrong moments, fall in love with the wrong people, and somehow still manage to build something meaningful out of it all. Because maybe that's what humanity truly is, a never-ending experiment in finding light inside the noise. And if there's any justice in the cosmos, the gods, or whatever's out there, must be watching, smiling and thinking, they still don't get it, but my God, they're trying. There's a strange sort of peace that comes when you finally admit you don't know what you're doing. Not the dramatic, existential kind where you stare into the void and question everything. The quiet kind. The one that arrives when you realize that most of life is just creative guesswork with slightly better lighting. You stop trying to impress the universe with your plans and start laughing at how often you've tripped into something wonderful by accident. It's funny, really. For a species that prides itself on intelligence, most of our best moments come from pure improvisation. Every generation believes it's smarter than the last, but we're still falling for the same cosmic jokes. We build systems to make sense of chaos, and the chaos just learns how to use them. The ancients worshipped weather. We worship Wi-Fi. One thunderstorm used to ruin a harvest. Now it ruins your Zoom call. Different tools, same panic. But maybe that's the beauty of it, the fact that we keep trying anyway. That despite the evidence, we believe that somewhere inside the confusion there's meaning, or at least a good story to tell later. Take time, for example. Humanity's most elaborate illusion. We chopped infinity into hours and minutes so we could pretend to have control. We invented schedules, calendars, alarms, little boxes to keep eternity organized. Then we spend half our lives trying to save time as if it were a currency we could keep in a jar. But time isn't something to manage. It's something to witness. It's happening whether we notice it or not. The irony is that the more we try to control it, the faster it seems to disappear. Maybe the trick isn't to chase time, but to make it feel noticed, like an old friend we finally stopped taking for granted. And isn't it strange how memory plays with that? The way it stretches some moments until they feel like entire chapters, then compresses whole years into a single blur. Science calls it psychology, but it's really poetry in disguise. We don't remember facts. We remember feelings. The smell of a street in summer, the sound of someone's laugh that you can't replicate no matter how hard you try. That's what we carry with us. Not the dates, not the numbers, but the texture of being alive. Memory doesn't archive life. It edits it into something bearable. But there's a danger in editing too much. Like we tend to curate our past like a museum, arranging the highlights for display while hiding the rooms we'd rather no one enter. We tell our stories as if we've always known what we were doing, smoothing over the fear, the shame, the awkward silence between the big moments. Yet those are the parts that make the story real. Growth doesn't happen in the epiphanies. It happens in the in-between, the quiet failures, the things we swore we'd never repeat, until we did. Maybe that's why forgiveness matters so much. Not as moral virtue, but as memory management. Forgiveness is how we make peace with the edits, and humor somehow is the glue that holds it all together. Without it, we'd drown in the seriousness of our own existence. Laughter is the body's rebellion against despair. A little, I see you, chaos, but you're not winning today. It's what turns misery into something survivable. A stubbed toe, a breakup, a public humiliation, all tragic in the moment, all hilarious with enough distance. Time may not heal all wounds, but it has impeccable comedic timing. The irony is that the things that break us often become the things that connect us. No one bonds over perfection. It's the cracks that make people relatable. The awkward confessions, the embarrassing stories, the moments when someone admits they were scared too. That's where the walls drop. Vulnerability feels terrifying until you realize it's just honesty without makeup. The people who make life bearable aren't the ones who seem invincible, but the ones who say, yeah, me too, when you least expect it. Still, we resist that openness. We build emotional armor out of sarcasm and ambition, pretending we don't care so no one can hurt us. But the armor gets heavy, and sooner or later we realize we can't hug anyone through it. That's when life starts peeling it away piece by piece through disappointment, love, loss, all those experiences that remind us how fragile we actually are. It's cruel and kind at the same time. The world keeps breaking us just enough to make sure we can still feel, and feeling, inconvenient as it is, might be the point of all this. To feel deeply, joy, fear, heartbreak, awe, is to participate fully in the chaos. It's risky, yes, but it's the only thing that makes existence more than just survival. We weren't built to be efficient. We were built to be moved, to stand in front of something beautiful and forget for a second how small we are, to laugh at something dumb and realize we're not alone, to cry at a song we've heard 100 times because suddenly the lyrics mean something new. Maybe that's how the universe speaks. Not in lightning bolts or revelations, but in those tiny collisions of emotion that catch us off guard. The conversation has been happening all along. We just forget to listen. The whisper is in the way the wind hits a window, or how someone says your name when they're tired but happy you're there. The world isn't hiding meaning from us. It's hiding it in plain sight, scattered across moments we rush past. So perhaps the real art of living isn't about finding clarity, but learning how to stay curious inside the confusion, to laugh when it doesn't make sense, to cry when it does, to forgive yourself for being both the villain and the hero in your own story. Because maybe, when the curtain finally falls, the point was never to have all the answers. It was to have lived the question so fully that the mystery itself felt like home. And if that's true, then maybe, just maybe, we've been doing better than we think all along. There's something oddly reassuring about realizing that everyone you admire is also, in some way, improvising their way through existence. The philosopher, the artist, the CEO, all of them are, at best, experts at pretending they know what they're doing. Humanity's greatest illusion isn't money or religion, it's competence. We've spent centuries perfecting the art of looking like we have a plan. But the truth is, we're all just guessing, some with better vocabulary and lighting than others. It's chaos wrapped in a blazer, and somehow that's what keeps the world spinning. We call it growth, but most of the time it's just trial and error with better PR. Think about it. Every major invention came from someone breaking something first. Fire probably started because someone tripped. Bread was likely a failed porridge. Half of history's progress is just people cleaning up their own accidents and calling it innovation. It's almost poetic how the world keeps moving forward through our collective clumsiness. We call it evolution, but it's really a series of elaborate oops moments that somehow worked out. And yet, we're terrified of mistakes. We treat them like personal betrayals instead of what they really are, instructions. Failure isn't the opposite of success. It's the tuition you pay to learn how to handle it. Every misstep is a footnote in the manual no one gave you. But we spend so much time avoiding embarrassment that we forget how powerful it is. Embarrassment is proof that you tried. It's the scar tissue of courage. And if you can laugh at it, really laugh, then it loses its power to humiliate you. That's why humor is the cheapest form of therapy and maybe the most effective. We take ourselves far too seriously for creatures that still hiccup. Think about that for a second. Hiccups are your body's way of reminding you that you're basically a confused amphibian with Wi-Fi. We've built skyscrapers, mapped genomes, invented quantum computers, and yet a tiny spasm in your diaphragm can make you useless for 10 minutes. It's humbling. It's also hilarious. The universe keeps slipping these little jokes into our biology just to remind us not to get cocky. Maybe humility is the real superpower we've been overlooking. Not the kind that disguises pride and false modesty, but the genuine kind. The ability to laugh at your own insignificance without feeling small. The kind that lets you marvel at the stars without needing to own them. We keep searching for purpose like it's some exclusive prize, but maybe the point isn't to be important. It's to be aware, to notice the details, the way light pools on a table in the morning, the absurd grace of someone chasing a hat in the wind. The world is full of tiny miracles that keep happening whether we're ready to appreciate them or not. And the funny thing is, the moment you start noticing, the whole game changes. You stop seeing life as a ladder and start seeing it as a mosaic, a billion tiny pieces that make sense only when you step back. Not every piece is pretty. Some are sharp, awkward, or completely out of place. But together, they form something that could never have existed without the imperfections. Maybe the point was never to collect only the beautiful pieces, but to learn how to love the composition as it is. Still, it's hard not to compare. The human brain is wired for it. From childhood, we're taught to measure ourselves against others. Grades, trophies, followers, square footage. But comparison is a rigged game because it's always played with missing information. You're comparing your behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel. It's like judging a movie by its trailer and wondering why your life doesn't have explosions. Everyone's fighting battles you'll never see. The loudest confidence often hides the quietest fear. Maybe that's why empathy feels like rebellion in a world addicted to judgment. To pause and ask, what if they're doing their best, is a radical act, because they probably are. We all are in our own messy ways. The driver who cut you off, the colleague who snapped, the friend who withdrew, they're not villains. They're just people at different stages of breaking and mending. And if you can hold that thought long enough, anger starts to soften into understanding. It's not about being passive, it's about remembering that everyone's human, even you. But empathy is risky. It requires vulnerability. And vulnerability feels like walking around without armor in a world that occasionally throws rocks. It's easier to be cynical. Cynicism feels safe because it keeps disappointment at arm's length. But it's also a slow form of starvation. Hope, for all its fragility, feeds something essential. It keeps the lights on inside when the world goes dim. Hope isn't naive. It's defiant. It's the audacity to look at the mess and still believe there's something worth saving. And maybe that's what ties everything together. The stubborn persistence of hope disguised as humor, love, or curiosity. It's what makes us write songs about heartbreak, plant trees for futures we'll never see, and keep getting up every morning even when the news feels unbearable. The beauty of humanity isn't that we're perfect, but that we keep trying, despite knowing we never will be. We fail, we laugh, we rebuild, and we love anyway. Because in the end, maybe the greatest wisdom isn't about mastering life. It's about surrendering to it. To stop trying to bend the world into your shape and start dancing with it instead. To realize that chaos isn't the opposite of order. It's the rhythm that gives it meaning. And once you start hearing that rhythm, the laughter, the heartbreak, the sheer absurdity of being alive, you can't unhear it. You just keep moving, one imperfect step at a time, amazed that somehow, against all odds, the music never really stops. There's something profoundly human about how we keep chasing answers from a universe that mostly replies in riddles. We ask for clarity, and life hands us irony. We beg for purpose, and it offers us paradox. Yet somehow, we keep showing up, half curious, half confused, completely unqualified, but still determined to make sense of it all. Maybe that's what defines us. Not intelligence, not progress, but persistence. The absurd, relentless decision to wake up and try again, even when yesterday made no sense. We love to think of ourselves as rational creatures, but that's only true until someone cuts us off in traffic or texts us, "We need to talk." Logic evaporates the moment emotion walks in. Our brains are basically stage managers trying to keep order while our hearts set the curtains on fire. It's chaos with good intentions. And maybe that's okay, because without emotion, reason is sterile. Without reason, emotion is blind. The tension between the two is what keeps the story interesting. The problem is, we keep trying to eliminate tension instead of understanding it. We want happiness without discomfort, love without vulnerability, progress without loss. But life doesn't work that way. Every joy casts a shadow. Every achievement leaves a residue of uncertainty. You can't separate light from darkness without erasing the whole picture. Maybe that's why people who've been through the worst often laugh the loudest. They've stopped expecting the light to arrive without the storm. And storms, for all their destruction, are honest. They don't pretend. They don't negotiate. They just happen. Loud, inconvenient, cleansing. Humans, on the other hand, have perfected the art of quiet chaos. We implode politely. We smile while crumbling. We post motivational quotes while our souls are buffering. There's a strange comedy in that, how desperately we try to look composed while everything we care about teaches us how to break gracefully. Even our search for meaning gets tangled in this contradiction. We treat meaning like buried treasure, as if someone hid it centuries ago and forgot to leave a map. But what if meaning isn't hidden at all? What if it's constantly appearing and disappearing, like sunlight through leaves? Not something to be found, but something to be noticed. We think enlightenment is about knowing, but maybe it's about paying attention. Maybe the point isn't to unlock some grand cosmic secret, but to realize the secret keeps changing shape depending on where you stand. We forget that wonder doesn't need to be mystical to be real. The everyday is already miraculous. We just get bored too quickly to notice. Somewhere between paying bills and checking emails, we lost the ability to be astonished by small things. The geometry of frost on a window, the way people in airports look like every story ever written. Curiosity used to be our superpower, but now we outsource it to algorithms. We've turned mystery into data and surprise into inconvenience. And yet, when something truly unpredictable happens, our hearts still jump like children remembering how to marvel. That's why humor matters so much. Laughter is the bridge between confusion and acceptance. It's what keeps the unbearable from becoming unlivable. When we laugh, even just for a moment, we admit that we don't have control. And somehow, that admission frees us. Think about it. The universe is 13.8 billion years old, and you're upset because your latte had the wrong milk. It's humbling and hilarious at once. Comedy is cosmic perspective in disguise, but laughter also reveals truth. It peels away the seriousness that hides our contradictions. You can tell what a person fears by what they joke about. We laugh at love because it terrifies us, at death because it confuses us, and at ourselves because deep down we know how fragile we are. Humor isn't just entertainment, it's confession. It's the sound of the soul learning to forgive itself. Forgiveness, though, might be humanity's most misunderstood art. We treat it like an award ceremony, something you grant when the other person deserves it. But real forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about releasing yourself from the rerun of pain. It's deciding that your story doesn't end at the betrayal. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the refusal to let bitterness become your personality. Because resentment is like drinking poison and waiting for karma to burp. Of course, that's easier said than done. Letting go feels unnatural when our entire biology is designed to remember threats. Our ancestors survived by holding grudges against snakes, fire, or that one guy in the tribe who kept stealing berries. But modern life doesn't need that kind of defense mechanism. The enemy isn't hiding in the bushes anymore, it's hiding in our thoughts. We've evolved past predators, but not past paranoia. Maybe that's why mindfulness became trendy. We're all just trying to shut the noise off long enough to hear our own sanity knocking. And when we finally do, when the noise quiets, something surprising happens. We start noticing that peace was never about silence, it was about rhythm. Life hums. Even when it hurts, there's a pulse beneath it. The sound of continuity, the proof that everything, even the chaos, belongs to something larger. We keep trying to write the final chapter of a story that was never meant to end. Maybe the goal isn't to resolve it. Maybe it's to stay curious enough to keep reading. Because that's what we are, really. Stories pretending to be people. Moving paragraphs of joy, fear, laughter, and loss, constantly rewriting themselves. And maybe, when all the sentences are done, when the last breath fades and the ink runs dry, the only question that will matter is this: did you love it while it lasted? If you did, if you truly did, then you understood everything you needed to, even without knowing a single thing. It's strange how we spend our whole lives trying to be understood when half the time we don't even understand ourselves. We walk around wearing emotional disguises, smiling through exhaustion, pretending indifference when our hearts are on fire, and then wonder why no one sees us clearly. Maybe it's because we're too busy performing to be perceived. Authenticity sounds noble until you realize it requires removing armor you've spent decades forging. It's terrifying to be real in a world that rewards performance. But maybe honesty isn't about exposing everything. Maybe it's about no longer faking what isn't true. There's freedom in saying, I don't know, or I'm not okay, without treating it as failure. Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's alignment. It's when your inner weather finally matches your outer sky. And ironically, that kind of raw honesty is magnetic. People are drawn to those who have stopped pretending because it gives them permission to do the same. Truth, it turns out, is contagious. The problem is, we confuse connection with comfort. Real connection is rarely comfortable. It stretches you, challenges your narrative, forces you to face the parts of yourself you'd rather keep hidden. That's why love, in all its forms, is both miracle and mirror. It reflects what's beautiful in us, but also what's unresolved. Falling in love is easy. Staying in love is an advanced course in emotional archaeology. You dig, you uncover, and sometimes you find bones instead of treasure. Yet you keep digging, because even the ruins teach you something about what it means to be human. We talk about love as if it's something that happens to us, but maybe it's something we do, over and over imperfectly, like a craft. Love isn't lightning, it's maintenance. It's remembering someone's coffee order even after a fight. It's saying, I'm sorry, before your ego approves the message. It's realizing that commitment isn't about staying the same, but about growing in compatible directions. And when that fails, because sometimes it does, it's about parting without bitterness, leaving space for gratitude instead of resentment. But gratitude itself has become a lost art. We treat it like a seasonal decoration, something to dust off on holidays. True gratitude isn't about grand gestures or public posts. It's about noticing. It's the quiet awe that sneaks in during the most mundane moments. The way sunlight hits your kitchen counter, the warmth of clean sheets, the fact that despite everything, your lungs keep breathing without permission. Gratitude doesn't ignore pain, it coexists with it. It says, yes, this hurts, and still, there's beauty here. Funny how easily we forget that beauty isn't just visual, it's experiential. It's in the way laughter erupts at the wrong time, or how silence between friends feels full instead of empty. Beauty isn't perfection, it's the presence of life, unedited. We spend fortunes chasing aesthetic versions of happiness, when the real thing has been quietly sitting beside us, asking for nothing but attention. Maybe the real luxury isn't abundance, it's awareness. And awareness changes everything. Once you start paying attention, life stops being background noise. You begin to notice how every small act ripples outward. The held door, the kind word, the smile offered to a stranger who didn't expect one. These gestures don't change the world in headlines, but they do in vibrations. We underestimate how much impact we have simply by being decent in a world obsessed with dominance. Sometimes, the most revolutionary thing you can do is refuse to become cynical. Still, cynicism is seductive. It masquerades as wisdom, convincing us that caring less is intelligence, but cynicism is just heartbreak wearing armor. It's the mind's way of protecting itself from disappointment. If I expect nothing, I can't be hurt. But the cost of that logic is enormous. When you numb pain, you numb joy too. Hope, even when it's naive, is a form of courage. It takes bravery to believe things can get better when every headline screams otherwise. Yet history itself is a collection of stubborn optimists who refuse to stop trying. Maybe that's why laughter and hope often arrive together. Both are rebellions against despair. They remind us that the human spirit is not a victim of circumstance, but an artist of adaptation. Even in ruins, people find rhythm. Even in darkness, someone starts to hum. We rebuild not because it's easy, but because it's instinct. The will to live isn't logical. It's primal poetry. It's the same force that makes grass grow through concrete and children ask impossible questions. And perhaps that's the point, to stay curious. Curiosity is the antidote to fear, the thread that keeps the story unfolding. The moment we stop wondering, we start decaying. Every great discovery, personal or scientific, began with someone asking a question that sounded foolish. What if we treated life like that again, as a question instead of a checklist? What if the goal wasn't certainty but wonder? Because maybe meaning isn't something we find at the end, but something we make along the way. In laughter, in struggle, in small acts of grace. The beauty of not having all the answers is that it keeps us moving, keeps us awake. We're all apprentices in the art of being alive, fumbling, failing, and occasionally astonishing ourselves. And somewhere between the questions, the chaos, and the laughter, we catch glimpses of something eternal. Not perfection, not control, but connection. And that, perhaps, was the answer hiding in plain sight all along. There's a peculiar moment in adulthood when you realize that no one is really keeping score. All the invisible judges you imagined, society, family, that one teacher who said you'd never make it, are too busy worrying about their own mistakes to notice yours. It's both liberating and disorienting, like finding out there's no script for the play you've been rehearsing your entire life. You can either panic or improvise, and most of us do a bit of both. Life, it turns out, is less about getting it right and more about staying curious enough to keep participating. We spend so much energy trying to appear competent that we forget how much power there is in admitting confusion. It's funny, isn't it? We built entire education systems to celebrate knowing, but the most transformative moments often begin with not knowing. Curiosity is the original engine of evolution. It's why early humans discovered fire and also why someone eventually decided to microwave a burrito at 3 a.m. just to see what would happen. There's courage in experimentation, even the silly kind, because curiosity means you haven't given up on wonder, and wonder is a form of hope wearing a disguise. But the modern world has a way of strangling curiosity with noise. We're flooded with information, opinions, outrage, advice, and algorithms that reward certainty over sincerity. Everyone wants to sound like an expert, even on subjects they learned about 5 minutes ago. The result is a society addicted to being right, even at the expense of being kind. We forget that it's possible to understand something deeply and still not have the full picture. Knowledge without humility becomes arrogance, and arrogance is just fear pretending to be confidence. Maybe that's why laughter feels so radical these days. It reminds us that we don't have to take ourselves so seriously. There's a kind of wisdom in humor that no textbook can teach. You can't laugh and cling to ego at the same time. One has to surrender. Comedy exposes truth through exaggeration, holding up a mirror to our absurdities until we can't help but see them. When you think about it, the universe itself has a dark sense of humor. We're spinning on a giant rock, worrying about emails, while somewhere a star just exploded. Perspective has never been funnier. And yet, for all our cosmic insignificance, we ache for meaning. We build careers, religions, identities, anything to convince ourselves that it all adds up. But what if meaning isn't a mountain to climb, but a trail we make as we walk? Maybe it's not something we find once and for all, but something that grows each time we choose to care. A small kindness, a moment of awe, a laugh, shared with someone who needed it. That's meaning in motion. It's fragile, fleeting, and precisely because of that, it's sacred. The irony is that our obsession with permanence often blinds us to what's already eternal. We chase legacy while ignoring presence. We scroll through memories while missing the moment that's happening right now. Think about it. How many sunsets have been sacrificed to the glow of a screen? How many conversations turned into background noise while we rehearsed our next clever line? We hoard moments instead of living them, like tourists of our own lives. But nothing you record will ever feel like what it felt to be there. The real thing never fits inside a frame. Maybe that's why silence unnerves us. It's the only space left where we can't distract ourselves from ourselves. In silence, there's nowhere to hide from the raw sound of your own existence. The heartbeat, the breath, the mental clutter shuffling around looking for a purpose. But if you can sit with it long enough, the noise starts to soften. You begin to notice something deeper, a pulse beneath the pulse, the quiet hum of being. It doesn't demand anything from you. It just asks you to listen. Listening, in itself, is a lost art. We listen to respond, not to understand. We listen for our turn, not for the truth. It's why conversations so often feel like duels instead of dances. But when someone truly listens to you, it feels like being seen without being exposed. It's one of the rarest gifts one person can give another, their full, unedited attention. And maybe that's the foundation of love, not romance or fireworks, but sustained attention. The willingness to witness someone's unfolding without trying to rewrite it. But even love, as we've built it, has become a strange performance. We've turned connection into content, affection into aesthetics. Relationships are curated for display rather than lived for depth. We talk about chemistry as if it's magic, forgetting that real love is more like gardening, slow, patient, sometimes muddy, but alive. It's not the grand gestures that keep it growing. It's the quiet choices, repeated daily, to nurture what's fragile. Love, like curiosity, is an act of faith disguised as attention. And perhaps that's the thread running through it all. Attention. What we pay attention to becomes our world. If we focus only on what's broken, we inherit despair. If we notice what's beautiful, even in small doses, we remember why it's worth fixing. Maybe the secret isn't to change the world in one sweeping gesture, but to keep falling in love with it, messy, ridiculous, heartbreaking as it is, again and again. Because despite everything, the world keeps offering new reasons to be astonished. That's the quiet miracle of being alive. No matter how many times we lose our way, the story doesn't stop inviting us back in. It doesn't demand perfection. It just asks that we keep noticing. The laughter, the silence, the sunlight through a dusty window. Tiny proof that even in the absurdity of it all, there's something profoundly right about being here. Maybe not to win or to conquer or even to understand, but simply to witness. To say, with awe and a hint of mischief, so this is what it feels like to exist. There's a quiet moment in everyone's life when the noise fades and you realize that you've been running for so long, you no longer remember what started the race. You've gathered goals, achievements, memories, some shiny, some cracked, and yet there's this faint hum of emptiness that success never seems to silence. Maybe it's because we've mistaken movement for meaning. We've been sprinting toward happiness as if it's hiding behind the next accomplishment, when maybe it's been trailing behind us all along, trying to catch up. It's odd how life tricks us like that. You spend your youth wanting to grow up and your adulthood wanting to rewind. You chase independence only to crave connection. You fight for freedom, then fill your calendar until you're chained by commitments again. Humans are the only creatures that can trap themselves with their own desires. We design cages out of ambition and then complain about the view. Maybe that's the cosmic joke, that everything we think we're chasing is just another version of ourselves, wearing a different costume. Take ambition, for instance. It's beautiful, dangerous, and exhausting all at once. The world worships it. The grind, the hustle, the late nights that prove you want it badly enough. But no one talks about what happens when you get it, when the applause fades and you realize that the peak you climbed is just a slightly higher treadmill. The truth is, fulfillment doesn't come from climbing higher, but from learning how to rest without guilt. The world might tell you that slowing down is weakness, but sometimes rest is rebellion, the refusal to be consumed by the machinery of productivity. And maybe that's why we've forgotten how to be still. Stillness feels unnatural in a culture that equates idleness with failure. We scroll, refresh, binge, repeat, terrified of what might surface if we sit alone with our own thoughts for too long. Silence has become the scariest sound. But if you lean into it, really listen, you start hearing something you've been missing. Yourself. Beneath the static of responsibilities and expectations, there's a voice that isn't trying to sell you anything. It just whispers, "Hey, remember me?" That voice tends to speak in odd ways, sometimes through intuition, sometimes through boredom, sometimes through the deep sigh you didn't realize you were holding. It shows up when you stop forcing things, like when you're washing dishes or stuck in traffic or walking aimlessly without your phone. It's the universe sneaking in between your scheduled chaos. You can't summon it on demand. You can only create enough space for it to show up. And when it does, it usually tells you something inconvenient like, you're not living the life you want, you're living the one that's expected. We like to think we're too evolved to fall into traps, but the biggest ones are invisible, crafted from praise, approval, and polite expectations. People applaud your stability even if it's slowly killing your joy. They call you responsible when you've just learned how to hide your exhaustion better. The world doesn't reward authenticity. It rewards consistency, even when that consistency means betraying yourself. And yet, some part of you still rebels. Quietly, stubbornly, it dreams of something else, not louder success, but deeper peace. That peace, ironically, often comes disguised as failure. When something collapses, a job, a relationship, a plan, our first instinct is panic. But destruction is sometimes mercy wearing an unpleasant face. The universe has an unromantic way of decluttering what no longer serves us. Think of all the doors that didn't open for you. How many of them were actually exits in disguise? There's a strange relief that comes from losing what was never really yours. You stop clinging, you stop pretending, And in that emptiness, you start breathing again. Maybe that's the whole trick, learning how to breathe through the transitions. We treat change like an enemy when it's really just evolution doing its job. Everything alive is in motion. Rivers, seasons, emotions, you. The only constant is the flow, but we build walls to protect ourselves from it. We call them plans, goals, routines. They make us feel safe until they start suffocating us. Maybe the point isn't to control the current, but to learn how to float without drowning in anxiety. After all, even the ocean pauses. The tide pulls back before it rises again. And that's what life does too. It pulls back before moving forward. Those quiet seasons when nothing seems to happen aren't punishment, they're incubation. The caterpillar probably thinks it's dying inside the cocoon, unaware that transformation always feels like suffocation right before flight. Growth rarely feels like progress when you're in it. It feels like confusion, like grief, like standing in the ruins of your old self wondering what's next. But that discomfort is the sound of your soul stretching. We forget that every version of ourselves had to die for the next to be born. You're not who you were 5 years ago, and that's not a tragedy. It's evidence that you've lived. The shedding isn't pretty, but it's necessary. You can't hold on to everything and still make room for anything new. And maybe that's what wisdom really is. Not knowing more, but needing less. Less control, less validation, less fear disguised as planning. What's left after that is clarity, the kind that doesn't shout but hums quietly, reminding you that being alive is already enough. So maybe the goal isn't to fix the chaos, but to dance with it, to find rhythm in the mess instead of waiting for the music to start, to laugh at how absurdly human it all is, the contradictions, the heartbreaks, the way we keep trying anyway. Because despite everything we do, we stumble, we laugh, we love, we lose, we rebuild. And in the middle of that repetition, we find flashes of something divine. Not in perfection, but in participation. The miracle isn't that life makes sense. It's that we keep showing up even when it doesn't. At some point, you realize that the finish line you've been running toward your entire life doesn't actually exist. It's a mirage that keeps moving each time you get closer, a cosmic joke that no one warned you about. You graduate, you find the job, you fall in love, you buy the thing, and still the horizon stays exactly where it was. It's as if life is whispering, "Oh, you thought this was it. How adorable." And maybe that's not cruelty, maybe that's mercy. Because if we ever did arrive, what would be left to chase? The mystery is what keeps us breathing. We think of life as a series of goals, but it's really a series of interpretations. The same event can be tragedy or comedy depending on where you decide to place the punchline. You spill coffee on your shirt before a meeting, disaster in the moment, anecdote by lunch, cosmic humor by evening. The universe never promised consistency, only material. It hands you absurdity, and it's up to you to decide whether to cry or laugh. The wisest people tend to do both, sometimes in the same minute. There's something strangely liberating about accepting that you're not supposed to have control. It's like realizing the GPS has been lying the whole time. There's no destination, just a very scenic detour. You start noticing things again. The texture of the air, the sound of someone humming next to you, the way the sunlight hits a cracked wall and makes it look like art. You begin to understand why children laugh so easily. They haven't yet been tricked into thinking joy needs a reason. Adults, on the other hand, demand justification before they smile, as if happiness needs a receipt. That's the irony of growing up. We gain experience but lose wonder. We replace "why not" with "what's the point?" and call it maturity. But somewhere deep down, the part of us that used to chase butterflies and make wishes on eyelashes still remembers. It waits patiently for us to get tired of being serious. That's when magic slips back in, not as fireworks, but as familiarity. The moment you stop expecting life to be spectacular is when you start realizing it already is. Of course, realizing that doesn't make the chaos disappear. The world will still find creative ways to test your patience. Traffic jams, heartbreaks, people who chew loudly. But the difference is how you meet it. You can either treat every inconvenience as evidence that the universe is against you, or you can see it as an invitation to practice grace. There's comedy and frustration if you look closely enough. Like how your Wi-Fi only breaks during important calls, or how your pet stares at you like it knows something about taxes that you don't. The universe is mischievous, not malevolent. And maybe that's why laughter is holy. It's the closest thing we have to surrender that doesn't feel like defeat. When you laugh at your own misfortune, you reclaim power from it. You say, "Fine, you win this round, but I'm still here." It's defiance disguised as amusement. Maybe that's why some of the funniest people have lived through the darkest things. They've learned that laughter isn't denial, it's survival. Humor turns pain into perspective, tragedy into texture. It's how we remind ourselves that even in despair, there's rhythm. That rhythm, the up, the down, the pause, is what ties everything together. Every story, every life, has its crescendos and silences. The trick is learning to love the pauses as much as the melody. We're so used to chasing the next big moment that we forget most of life happens in the in-betweens. The walk to the store, the quiet car ride, the few seconds before you answer a question. Those little pockets of time are where your soul catches its breath. You don't need fireworks to feel alive. Sometimes you just need to notice that you're breathing. But noticing requires slowing down, and slowing down feels rebellious in a world addicted to acceleration. We glorify speed, fast food, fast internet, fast answers. But some truths need time to ripen. You can't rush understanding any more than you can rush a sunrise. Impatience is just the ego's way of saying it's scared to wait. Yet waiting is where wisdom gathers. The longer you sit with uncertainty, the more it starts to look like clarity wearing different clothes. And when that clarity comes, it rarely shouts. It hums quietly beneath the noise, reminding you that peace isn't the absence of problems. It's the presence of perspective. You realize that every choice, even the wrong ones, built the version of you that can finally see the pattern. The heartbreaks, the embarrassments, the detours, they weren't interruptions. They were the curriculum. Life never wastes an experience. It just hides the lesson until you've stopped complaining long enough to notice it. Maybe that's the secret we've been missing all along, that there's no final revelation, only deeper participation. Meaning isn't something you find at the end of the road. It's what accumulates while you're stumbling through it. The laughter, the tears, the quiet moments that no one else sees, they all add up to something inexplicably human. You don't need to be extraordinary, you just need to be awake. Because the truth is, existence itself is the miracle. And maybe one day, when all the noise has settled and you look back, not with regret, but with amused disbelief, you'll see it clearly, that life was never a test or a race or a problem to solve. It was a story that kept rewriting itself every time you chose to begin again. The beauty wasn't in the answers, but in the attempt. The courage to keep showing up, even when nothing made sense. The willingness to keep loving, laughing, losing, and living as if the chaos itself were proof of something sacred. Maybe, in the end, that's all we were ever meant to do. Not to win at life, but to wonder at it.